Rajiv sir.
Ravi, can you please stop the music? Hello.
Very good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Can you please stop them? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, I just saw Sonal and other people also. Good afternoon, everyone. Are you able to log in properly and your audio? Kindly check your audio and the video also. Just kindly come on the screen if you don't mind.
Make some TV. Rajiv.
Anji, sir.
Is my background coming correctly?
Yeah, thoda sa sir, like IOD is coming properly.
The rest of it is not coming.
Like mine is coming ulta.
No, I think when we see it, it is ulta. But when I see it, it's okay.
For me, it is ulta. For you, I can see. Acha, that must be the thing, you know.
Yeah, the mirror image is coming.
Okay.
The disadvantage of the virtual background that you have is when you turn your head and all that, everything goes blurred. So,
okay.
Yeah, so long as you are straight, it's okay. Yeah, so I think it is much better for you to have, like I did not go for that IOD background because it was going on, my image was getting blurred.
Okay.
So I think, so it's okay.
Technical issue.
Yeah, actually there are certain colors which it accepts. Otherwise, like green is the favorite color of Zoom. So then your image doesn't get distorted. So, but our background is blue. So maybe, a little bit, we have to keep our head straight for next 5 minutes. No, sir, ठीक है, चल जाएगा. It's looking nice.
Now it is okay, or is it?
Yeah.
Hi, press. Hello.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Hi, Sonal. Good afternoon. Yesterday we spoke. I'm Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor.
Good afternoon. You forgot to tell us about the rule of green, though.
No, actually, I also read it. So if you have a green background, generally Zoom accepts that, and then the image doesn't get distorted.
Okay.
That is the, So if you go on the little bit on the website and maybe the Zoom, like you are setting the background, I had also read it, and that's how,
Okay. It's a learning.
It's a learning for all of us. I'm absolutely a mechanical guy who sees things. So, I'm a mechanical engineer by profession and served for 35 years with tanks and guns and all. So I don't know anything about IT. I've learned in these 3-4 years or, over a period of time in my life, actually. And I'm not professional like you guys, Hi, Chandan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Brigadier.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And really interesting green background story. Actually, green is used a lot in the animation industry.
Yeah, maybe, that must be the reason, I don't know the genesis behind it, but definitely I'll do a little more research on this and maybe, some people will get benefited next time once even I'll also be benefited by learning a little more.
Rajiv, you'd like to introduce ourselves?
Yes, I'm
Arun Balakrishnan,
yeah.
From IOD. Same with you, Chandan. I'm introducing myself as Arun Balakrishnan.
Sir is the chairman IOD Bangalore, and Mr. Press, you know very well, he is our chairman executive council, and I'm the regional director for IOD Bangalore.
Yeah, Prasanna, all the lawyers will know him, and more than that.
I'll take it as a compliment.
Of course. It is meant as one.
And I hope sooner other people have also been informed about it. They can log in or something like what we discussed yesterday,
Yes, I did tell all the panelists.
Yeah, at least they can just log in, check their this thing, and then subsequently they can log out. Also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me just remind them.
Yeah, that will be really great.
I'll do
that will be really
great.
So, Arun sir, I should start somewhere around 4.
Yeah.
4:01, depending on the little bit of audience. That's what I was deliberating.
Yeah.
Let the audience
now.
So keeping
I
that.
think today is generally a holiday.
Yeah,
actually, it is a holiday.
Holiday.
Holy. Today, and some people celebrate tomorrow also.
Yeah, right.
Rajiv sir, with your permission, can we start the IOD corporate video?
Yeah, please go ahead, because the moment a few other panelists and all they join, I just wanted to check their audio and the video basic.
Fine, no issue.
Yeah, that you have to keep a check. Thank you very much, Ravi. Thank you.
Igniting a revolution in the boardroom. Nurturing directors of the future. With that unique mission, Institute of Directors was set up in India in the year 1990 by late Dr. Madhav Mehra, a visionary to fill the need for professional development of corporate directors and prepare for an uncertain world.
IOD today is not merely a non-profit institution. It's a metaphor for the change that we will see in the corporate world.
Today, IOD stands as an apex association of corporate directors and also as a centre of excellence, preparing the directors and building boards for tomorrow.
Directors are the most critical players, and therefore the Institute of Directors is a very major institution to take India forward.
The experience, intelligence, and vision of the Institute of Directors guarantee its success.
I greatly appreciate the Institute's work in promoting responsible and sustainable business in India and all over the world.
Over the past 3 decades, IOD has grown from strength to strength, connecting executives from the private, public and government domains in India and across the globe. Today, IOD has a network of over 30,000 senior executives, equipping each one of them with a range of resources, professional expertise, and above all, exposure to unique global networking opportunities.
I think I have to compliment the IOD because they've started talking about governance and the role of directors from 1990 onwards, which was not as fashionable as it is today.
How companies are governed makes all the difference in the performance of a company, in the trust in business.
The change in what society accepts is normal is one of the big changes that is taking place in our expectation of companies and their behavior, and therefore the leadership of the boards.
No matter how you view our growth story, I think issues of corporate governance and what happens in the private sector, economic entities and the boards is central to our understanding.
The Directors Membership-Based Association, IOD, has a number of regional offices pan-India and a few global centres to provide local membership support services and offer platforms for learning, networking and exchange of ideas. Annually, some of the distinguished leaders in India and abroad are felicitated through distinguished fellowships for their outstanding leadership and public service.
It gives me immense honor to accept this award on behalf of my own company, JK Tyre & Industries. And in fact, I feel that the 17,000 strong Team JK Tyre are the one who really made it happen.
I'm pleased that the relationship between the BBC and India, a relationship which goes back 80 years, should be recognised in this way.
The Honourable President of India, late Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, was the first Distinguished Fellow of the IOD in June 1994.
I do hope you will continue to encourage and support people in different walks of life towards contributing to the national good, to national development in right earnest.
Everyone's boat in this country is now being led by corporates, and people who are achievers in their own private lives are now also using their might and also their money in uplifting everyone's boards, even in public life. So thank you very much.
What kind of directors I'm looking for? So the difference between people of my generation and the people of the next generation is we had the questions we were afraid to ask. Youngsters are not afraid to ask the questions, and you need questions asked in boardroom.
Ecosystem is today in a certain amount of confusion that what is happening. People are also worried about rules being changed too often, too frequently.
Today's globally competitive market and business environment demands world-class professionals as board directors. The IOD pioneered directors' education has been a huge leap forward to meet this demand. Over the years, IOD has trained more than 6,000 directors as certified corporate directors through over 40 training courses annually, developing independent and women directors for effective and diverse boards.
Inclusion is what is going to help you deliver more profitability and more sustainability. So please put that into action in your business.
Increasing numbers of ambitious companies will have the opportunity to build multinational brands should they wish. With this enhanced opportunity comes increased responsibility.
The condensed Masterclass training course for directors, a 3-day certified program started in the year 2003, helps in bringing best practices and up-to-date knowledge on a range of boardroom, commercial and legal issues covering corporate governance, sustainability, risk management, culture, ethics and stakeholder engagement.
Corporate governance, sustainability, transparency, efficacy are all part of the business models that we wish to see, not just for our businesses, but for all businesses.
Another feather in the IOD cap is the Board Research and Advisory Services. Through BR&A, IOD helps to identify and surmount the barriers impeding the board's effectiveness and compliance through specialized advisory, consultancy and training services. Its advisory services on annual compliance and board evaluation practices have been a great support for medium and small industries.
The Institute of Directors is a great organization, and the expectation is that it would be something that would open new thoughts, new avenues.
It has a special division called Organisation for Non-Executive Independent Directors, a platform to look after the interests of these directors. Recently, it also launched an MSME division in association with the MSME Ministry to enable India's growth engines to learn business management, finance, digitization and effective compliance and governance.
The biggest possible help for MSME is the market access. And this is where the big corporates, they can come forward and then ensure that market access to these units. And that is the biggest possible source of CSR, I would say.
Building an effective business network is vital. Every year, IOD conducts a large number of workshops, seminars, national and international conventions on current boardroom challenges, covering themes ranging from corporate governance, sustainability, leadership, business excellence, corporate social responsibility, environment and climate change.
This type of conferences bring together the intelligentsia, and we are able to deliberate, and certainly some policy changes can happen because of this conference.
IOD has really been very instrumental in enhancing the trade and investment between India and UK.
Not only is it a very good networking place, but it is also a place where there is a lot of credibility to the people who come here, because the people who are invited here will be people of eminence in their own fields.
It's important for us to be working alongside other organizations and institutes, implement the best practices, share our own best practices and build on that.
To make India a preferred investment destination, annual outreach programs, global business meets and workshops are also conducted, not only in different parts of the country, but also global business hubs like London, Dubai and Singapore since 2003 to promote global exchange of ideas and networking.
It's one of the best global conference, London Global Conference of IOD, because the theme is corporate governance.
I just want to not only thank the organisers for the award and everyone that has made this evening's event possible, but just to reflect upon the UK-India relationship.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating to be talking about the long-standing relationship between UK and India, to hear questions from businesses.
Many businesses, and I'm glad to see that Singapore is one of the most highest investment destinations into India. This is a great forum to make new friends. Come and live here, do business here. It's a great hub and a gateway to Asia.
What we want to take out from this conference is a strategy for these changing times.
One of the early prime initiatives of IOD has been the institution of the Golden Peacock Awards that have become a benchmark of corporate excellence globally, attracting more than 1,000 applications for 15 different corporate functional verticals annually. Former Chief Justice of India, Chairman, National Human Rights Commission of India and National Commission for Constitution of India Reforms, Justice M.N. Venkacheliya is the National Chairman of IOD and also the Chairman of these coveted awards jury.
The boards must consist of people who are ethical, honest, accountable, transparent, and last but not the least, innovative.
These awards have a meticulously defined and transparent 3-level evaluation criteria managed by independent professional assessors. Today, no other business award has accorded such recognition and patronage, known as a badge of excellence globally.
These awards, Your Highness, encourage us to continue investing in ideas, solutions, for our customers and stakeholders.
There have to be groups which take people along and participative management of various environmental issues. I think that's the purpose why Golden Peacock Awards are given.
I've been associated with this award since last 10-12 years, and they are very, very selective. They have a very good jury meet, and it's very encouraging.
In order to connect directors with research, policy initiatives and thought leadership, IOD has an extensive range of professional publications, handbooks for directors and a monthly journal, Director Today. These help keep members updated on current and emerging corporate boardroom policies and business and corporate processes for smooth business functioning. Another milestone has been the setting up of the IOD Foundation to promote inclusive growth. The Institute of Directors has not only made a positive impact by training and mentoring thousands of senior corporate executives and directors, but has metamorphosed the way businesses function, acting as an unparalleled catalyst in the process of innovation, leadership, and global competitiveness.
For the growth, success and safety, you are our partners here. Thank you very much.
Huh?
You're on
Over to
mute.
you, sir.
Rajiv, you're on mute.
Constant Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Wait for another 2 minutes.
Yeah. Start at the dot of 4.
Yeah. By my watch, it is 15:58 right now.
58. 58.
Yeah.
2-3 minutes too.
Yeah, I can always chat.
Yes, Sudarshan.
Good evening, Sundareshan. Good evening, Bhavik. And welcome.
Yeah, Kapoor sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Fine. Wish you
How
all
are you, sir?
the best.
Thank you, sir.
Fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Just a couple of minutes. We are going to start, sir. I think it is 4 o'clock, sir. Shall I start, if you permit?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Acha, Prasanna, sir, you are there, no, sir? Mr. Prasanna?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, good enough. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Institute of Directors, it's a pleasure to welcome all our esteemed guests, IOD members and associates to this webinar. I am Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor, the Regional Director of Institute of Directors. As we all are aware that IOD has been instrumental in hosting a series of offline and virtual events at national, international, and regional level, wherein leaders, thinkers, and policymakers are brought under one roof to discuss and deliberate the challenges and opportunities on some of the critical, sensitive, current, and futuristic issues impacting the spectrums of governance, business, and civil society. thereby sensitizing the board of directors and other senior management. But due to the pandemic, this process was disrupted, but then we all developed a habit of working remotely, wherein we all adopted and got empowered ourselves with the digital revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, today in the current financial year, IOD Bangalore is hosting its last in the series webinar with the theme Governance and Board Leadership in the Digital Era, with focus on embracing digital technology and related challenges in the framework of malware or ransomware, we call it, and data protection, data privacy, and cybersecurity. The subject is vast and deep, and to cover this sensitive and important subject, we have invited a galaxy of eminent and illustrious speakers who shall enlighten us by sharing their thoughts on what organizations are doing and how they can get ready for what's next in this time of rapid change. And to make this happen, I would like to thank Mindtree for getting associated with Institute of Directors as the presenting partner. As we all know, Mindtree is a multinational information and technology services consulting company formed in the year 1999 with headquarters in New York, USA, and Bangalore, with 43 offices across 17 countries. It is a leader in digital transformation and technology services that delivers solutions from ideation to execution, thereby enabling global 2,000 clients to outperform the competition termed as Born Digital. It has also been working on enterprise application integration, popularly known as EAI, and enterprises resource planning, that is the business process management, research and development, including testing like integrated test methodology, popularly termed as MindTest, and also IT infrastructure management and services, MWatch, and the list is endless. Their services have been adequately recognized by being recipient of several prestigious awards, and in the year 2021, they bagged 14. Once again, I would like to thank the management of Mindtree for getting associated with IOD Bangalore, and we look forward to more such collaborations. Before I hand over to Mr. Prasanna, would like to highlight one important point. Since the speakers have commitments and cannot prolong beyond the stipulated time limit, may I request the august audience to post their questions in the chat box, and we shall endeavor to find the answers. Thank you, and may I request Mr. Prasanna to come forward and take over the proceedings. Over to Mr. Prasanna, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor. Thank you very much for foreshadowing the kind of a theme of the webinar, and also thanking our principal partner, Mindtree. And thank you very much for doing that. There are many speakers today. We have got illustrious gathering of speakers and panelists who will all talk about the various aspects of the webinar theme, which is basically what is ultimately board leadership in the digital era. So it's not just governance, it also drills down into various other details. So when you talk about board leadership in a digital era, one of the things that comes to my mind as a lawyer is the kind of the laws that actually are promulgated to govern data privacy, and therefore those laws must be complied with, and therefore the obligation of the board in making sure there is data regulation compliance. Technological advances have been absolutely mind-boggling and leading to the general data protection and regulation, GDPR, and it basically regulates how personal data of European Union, meaning individuals, can be collected, and then including the right to be forgotten. That's the most important and challenging aspect of data regulation. The national data protection laws are all over different parts of the world, Canada, Japan, Australia, Singapore, and various other countries. And of course, you have got specific enactments in the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which requires that consumers be made aware of what personal data is collected and gives consumer control over their personal data, including the right to tell organization not to sell their personal data. And of course, there are industry-specific privacy guidelines, such as in the United States, you have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it governs how personal healthcare data should be handled. So there are enormous amount of obligations that are going to be cast on boards, depending upon the industry which they actually serve. So this and many other aspects will be thoroughly discussed and debated upon, not only by individual speakers, but also by the panelists who are going to address a number of issues during the course of their discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, may I actually invite and request Mr. Arun Balakrishnan, our honorary chairman of IOD, to make the opening remarks. Briefly, Arun has been the CMD of Hindustan Petroleum Corporation. Currently, Arun is on the board of a number of companies as independent director, besides being member of the Board of Governors, University of Petroleum Energy Studies. He's a chemical engineer with a postgraduate diploma from the Indian Institute of Management. He is a recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award 2008 from his alma mater. In the recent past, the All India Management Association has conferred a fellowship, and the Institute of Engineers has presented a Scroll of Honor for recognition of his outstanding contribution to the profession of chemical engineering. Without much ado, may I request Mr. Arun Balakrishnan to please make his opening remarks and set the pace for this webinar to gain momentum. Over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Press. Thank you. First of all, good evening to all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to make these opening remarks on such a very interesting subject, governance and board leadership in the digital era. This is a subject of great interest today and the relevance to the boards of companies as well as senior management personnel. The key word, digital era, is indeed an all-encompassing one, and it is making sweeping changes in the country and in the world. The India stack of Aadhaar and UPI are two digital interventions that has had a tremendous impact in the country. Many countries in the world, especially the African countries, are in the process of replicating the India stack as they have seen the changes and the ease of daily transactions that is making life simpler in India. India is progressing well in digitization, primarily because of the unprecedented spread of smart mobile phones. Today, nearly 50% of the phones sold in India have digital access, and software is being developed for ordinary phones as well. Thus, digitization can indeed reach the bottom of the pyramid as well in a very short period of time. While digitization has its benefits, it is not without its problems. For us as individuals, but also as corporates. The first is that what one man makes, another man can destroy or misuse. So we all know what your computer and mobile phone can be hacked, that your computer and mobile phone can be hacked by these specialist hackers. They can access all the data that we have and even siphon away the money in our bank accounts. Hackers have been breaking into and taking control of the computer systems of companies and asking for ransom worth millions of dollars. There was a recent CNBC report that said that nearly 76% of Indian companies suffered ransomware attacks in the year 2021, as per a survey conducted by them. Hence, this is one area boards necessarily have to take cognizance of. Such attacks can freeze the operations of the company and affect its financials. A report based on 20 years of data collected from cyber surveillance trade shows and arms fairs says hacking is the fastest growing business segment alongside more traditional wares like guns and tanks. And that is really very interesting. It also argues that numerous companies in this field operate internationally and deserve more attention from policymakers. This is indeed, in my opinion, a very new field of specialization for the nerds, if I may add. Then comes a larger issue of data collection by companies. Almost every app that you download into your mobile phone wants to have access to your personal data, such as messages, contacts, camera, gallery, and whatnot. All you have to do is keep on picking, otherwise you can't enroll yourself in the app. Okay. They can then process such data and sell it to marketing agencies, as Prasna was just talking about, and all for a good profit, neat profit for that matter. Thus, unwittingly, we become the product and not the customer. So whenever you permit, or whether you permit or not, companies collect a lot of data. Google Map tells me every month where all I have traveled the previous month. I think they have much more data than what my declining memory can hold or recall really. To control this intrusion in our privacy, the European Union had introduced a law that would restrict collection and use of data. And as Press said, many other countries have also done it. But I find this GDPR of Europe very, very interesting, because they have talked about 6 principles on data collection. One is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, not like the apps that we have collect that kind of data we just now talked about, the accuracy of the data they collect, and the integrity and confidentiality as well. The GDPR includes an additional principle of accountability, which acts as an overarching set of requirements related to the other 6. India's data privacy legislation is finally taking shape. The original draft bill has been changed or modified to some extent. The Joint Parliamentary Committee has debated extensively on this, and there appears to be a consensus about what changes are required. The new draft legislation is likely to be tabled in the ongoing Parliament session. We have to look forward to that. The webinar that follows will address these issues. We have solicited the presence of very distinguished speakers for the purpose. We have none other than Justice Sri Krishna, the fountainhead of data protection in India, giving the keynote address today, followed by Professor S. Raghunath of IIM Bangalore, who has done a lot of research work, and Mr. Anand from Data Security Council of India, who has also been very closely associated with Justice Sri Krishna. The concluding program will be a panel discussion moderated by Ms. Sonal Basu, the General Counsel of Mindtree. And the eminent panelists are Mr. Chandan Panit of Mindtree, Rajesh Kumar from the Data Protection Office of Infosys, and Mr. P. Mayoran, Partner Cybersecurity, KPMG. I am sure you will be updated with the latest on all these issues in the course of the next 1.5 hours. All of us on the board of companies should find the proceedings useful so as to ensure good governance in the boards that we sit on. Thank you, and over to you. Back to you, Prasanna.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arun, for prefacing that. We are going to be awaiting Justice Sri Krishna to log in. But I'm rather tempted to ask you, Arun, you have been on the board of a number of companies. During the course of your deliberations in the board, has data privacy and breach of data and various other issues relating to the board leadership in digital era, as it were, has that actually surfaced in any of the boards, and how has the board actually dealt with those things? Perhaps your practical insights would be very, very useful if you can share with us.
Most of the 5 or 6 companies I'm currently associated with, being an independent director on their boards, digitization has been taken very seriously by every company because it's a matter of survival as far as they are concerned. Okay, and as I said, along with the digitization comes cyber security issues. That has also been addressed to a great extent. And though I said quoted some data saying that a large number of companies in India had issues of ransomware, the 5 or 6 companies I'm currently associated, some of them are pretty large ones as well, and some MNCs as well, have not experienced hacking and ransomware issues as yet. Though as well, I think as per law, I think in case they are hacked, they have to declare immediately to the government, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, for immediate action. That has not happened so far. As regards the understanding of data privacy and the responsibilities as far as governance is concerned, I think companies are just beginning to recognize the fact that they have to be very careful about the data they collect and how secure the data is kept. And at least these 5 companies I'm associated with, I'm quite sure they are not in the business of selling the data that they have collected. It is not only the personal data of the directors or the customers. There are so many stakeholders for any company, probably numbering of at least a large company could be up to 1,000. And for each stakeholder, there are probably half a dozen employees there whose data will also be with us. Okay. So we have to be very careful of that, because each one of them have an issue with the data privacy. Because if we are in a cyber attack, all the data that you have will get exposed. So I as an independent director and my fellow independent directors in these companies, we make it a point to tell the management to have a separate unit to check on this. And we also take up this matter in the risk management committee as well. And this is a key area. So to help the senior management understand the seriousness of this, I have been insisting on the management to invite well-known professionals to talk to them about cybersecurity as well as data privacy. So this is the current state of affairs as far as I know, Prasanna.
Thank you. That is very, very useful, because that gives a practical insight. I'm sort of tempted to turn to Sundaresan. Jayesh, you have been looking at a number of companies. You have been dealing with a whole lot of responsibilities and duties of directors and all that. I just want you to give a kind of a high-level view as to how boards are really engaging themselves in the matter of leadership during the digital era. Can you please give us some highlights of your own views, please?
Well, Pras, my view is I go with the responsibility of each board member, actually. When I say responsibility of each board member, we have seen in the past how private information inside the boardroom has actually got exposed in some social media. I mean, that is what is the biggest worry that I have today. I mean, one, as Arun beautifully touched upon the digitization process. Now, I come from the viewpoint of a director and their liability and how they should behave responsibly in a social media. So to that extent, I think, we as independent directors, we have limitation of what to speak, how much to speak, where to speak. I think, from that viewpoint, from a director point of view, there has to be a lot of responsibility. I will just give you a small instance where one independent director actually went on Twitter and informed the stakeholders what's happening inside the boardroom. I mean, in fact, it led to a huge corporate governance issue around a few years back. So, Pras, my take is, from a board perspective, from an individual member perspective, I think there is a lot of responsibility in this digital era, which we need to take care of.
I'm going to, as we wait for Justice Sri Krishna to log in, I'm just going to ask one question, which both Arun and you can actually.
I think he has logged in, I think. Yeah.
I think, yeah, we will just give him a couple of minutes. I just want to ask this one question. What is the board management dichotomy in terms of data governance? Do you see a kind of working together, or is the board always worried about how management is going to actually implement those policies with the board actually based on what kind of oversight the board can have? Arun and Jayesh, quick comments.
Yeah, Press, the management and board both are very conscious about it, but it is a responsibility of the board to ensure that we don't violate any of the statutes that are there in the country. Okay, so the best way for doing that is that we take it up in the audit committee. Basic questions are asked about the secrecy of the data that we have. The second part is that in the risk management committee, that is where we have identified data theft as one of the biggest risks today. Earlier of fire and safety and other things, they are all there, but they are getting overshadowed by this issue about data privacy. and its impact. Because once the law is passed in the parliament, which is most likely, as I said, during this parliament session is what I hear, then the penalties involved will be very high. So managements have to start being prepared even right now before the law comes into the picture. Thank you.
A quick comment from you.
My take is management has to be responsible with the data, whereas the board has a duty to protect that data. So how much ever you would like to tilt on the management, I think ultimately the board is going to be held responsible for anything that is going to go wrong in a corporation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we are indeed now delighted to welcome Justice B.N. Sri Krishna. So we are very, very grateful to you that you could actually find the time with amidst your busy schedule and accept our invitation to be with us this afternoon. Justice B.N. Sri Krishna has been a judge at the Supreme Court of India from 2002 to 2006. He was appointed as the one-man commission to inquire into the riots and incidents in the Mumbai during 1992 to January 1993. He started his career as an advocate in Bombay High Court in 1962 and specialized in the field of labor and industrial law. He served as a judge of the Bombay High Court from 1990 till 2001, when he was appointed as the Chief Justice of the High Court of Kerala. He was appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court in 2002, where he served until his retirement in 2006. And more importantly, Justice Sri Krishna was actually asked to head the committee to draft a data protection framework in India. He is now currently the Vice President and Trustee of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and a trustee at the India International Center. In the past, he has been an independent director of the NSE and director of NSDL, and he has also been part of the National Security Depository Limited. Justice Sri Krishna has been a member of several professional associations. He was a life member of the Labor Law Practitioners, the National Institute of Personnel Management. He was also a member of the Western Region Committee of the Employers Federation of India and Industrial Research Association USA and the International Bar Association London. We are indeed delighted and privileged to have Justice Sri Krishna with us, and he will be sharing his insights into the kind of experiences that he had in the course of being the chairman of the committee that actually drafted the data protection framework in India, and also whether he thinks it is really working and what needs to be done, and many more insights that only Justice Sri Krishna can bring to bear. Over to you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Prasanna. A good evening to all of you who have logged in. I appreciate the Institute of Directors taking a keen interest in the subject, because it is going to be, as they say, the writing on the wall is already there, although it's not very visible right now thanks to delays in the law being passed. True, I was just listening to what was being said by the previous speakers on the questions. I was also an independent director in at least 3 companies, and I'm aware that risk management was one of the biggest issues that we had to deal with, particularly since I was on the NSDL, and NSDL does a lot of digital record keeping and electronic communication matters. So 2-3 things arise in such a situation like that. The security of the data, the integrity of the data, and the responsibility to ensure that the data is capable of retrieval when it is needed. Otherwise, it's good as saying that it is all there. It's very secure. And it's like with the Padmanabha Swami temple. Gold is all there. It's secure. Nobody can take it. It shouldn't be that way. It should be capable of being retrieved by the company which has collected the data and with a view to using it. Now, this is the general thing. Now, as far as the situation in this country is concerned, it is really volatile. I really don't know where we have landed up. I distinctly remember that fateful day on sometime in 2019-16, end of 2016, and I was about to catch a flight to New York, and I got a SOS from the law minister saying that we want to set up a committee for the exploring the contours of the data privacy law in this country, and I want you to be the chairman. So I said, okay, I'll come back. After 2 months, I was going on a holiday. I'll come back and do it. No, sir, it's very urgent. Monday morning, we have to answer to the Supreme Court. The reason that the issue became so urgent was that in this country, the issue of data privacy or the right to privacy of data had not been carefully factored into any of the laws. The judgments were also somewhat difficult to reconcile because some judgments took the view that there is a fundamental, that the right to privacy, and then whether it is a right to privacy is there or not. Those are all basically issues which arose in connection with, the doctor disclosing the difficulties of health issues of a prospective bridegroom or bride to the other side and things like that. Or they arose in connection with the police monitoring, the excessive monitoring of a suspected criminal. Now, in those circumstances, the judgments were somewhat conflicting. No issue had been raised as to whether it was a fundamental right at all because nobody had really gone into that issue. The issue became critical because of your Aadhaar card. Aadhaar, which was started by the government of India as a department. Originally, when UIDIA was started, it was a department of the government, a part of the executive wing of the government. And at that time, the question arose whether issuing an Aadhaar card with a distinctive number to a resident of this country would amount to invasion of his privacy right. Some of the activists challenged it, and one of them was former Justice of the Karnataka High Court Justice Puttaswamy. He was also a leading petitioner before the Supreme Court. When this issue was being argued, the basic thrust of the issue was that this is an invasion of my privacy. And incidentally, somebody raised the issue and said, it is my fundamental right. So the Supreme Court bench, which was hearing, two-judge bench, was a little puzzled. They said, why do you say it is a fundamental right? Under what constitutional provision is there? So they were not able to find out a specific provision in the Constitution which says you have a right of privacy with regard to data. Then a larger bench was constituted. And the larger bench went into this question and tried to reconcile all the conflicting judgment, and finally came to the conclusion that right to privacy was a fundamental right, subsumable under Article 21. Please note, Article 21 is the fundamental right in Part 3, which guarantees life and freedom to everyone, every person. Now, the next question that arises is, if it is something that is inherent in your right to life, just like for example, I cannot be imprisoned unless there is a valid law which is consistent with constitutional parameters. I cannot be arrested without a particular law which is consistent with constitutional guarantees. So similarly, the question that arises is whether there can be a law which is consistent with the fundamental rights of the citizens and non-citizens also. Now, the government were therefore under tremendous amount of pressure, particularly in view of what was happening in Europe, where the GDPR was about to be considered as the law on the subject, and it was about to be passed. So ultimately, the committee had to take a lot of input from people. The committee went around the country, held discussions with their members of the public. We invited various people, academics, lawyers, judges, former judges, and government officers, everybody concerned. At 5 or 6 places, we had public meetings and then took a lot of inputs. Then thousands of documents were addressed to us on the issue. Finally, we produced a report which was submitted to the government, I believe, in 2018. A report accompanied by a draft bill on the subject called the Personal Data Protection Bill. Bill, that's correct. Now, we had said that, hey, look, the Supreme Court in that Justice Puttaswamy's case laid down three important principles. They said the fundamental right of a person cannot be touched except by a law made by Parliament. And that law should have some object which is declared why it wants to infringe the fundamental right. And there should be some rational connection between what is being said and what is being thought to be thought to be the objective. And finally, that there is what is known as the doctrine of proportionality. If you want to swat a fly, you take a fly swatter, you don't put an atom bomb and kill the fly. So these three fundamental principles were to be reckoned with. Now, the question that arises is, was the bill modulated to accommodate these three? Now, unfortunately, in this country, high-powered committees are appointed, their recommendations are taken, and then those recommendations and reports are subjected to some kind of a scrutiny by a group of bureaucrats, and then by a group of ministers, and finally what comes out into the law as parliament through parliamentary action is something that is even not recognizable as the original report. And this is precisely what happened to the report that is submitted by the committee headed by me. The bill was of 2000, the draft was of 2017. It went through all these modulations, and finally in 2018, the government said that we are going to put this in Parliament. Fortunately, the law minister recognized that it was too complex a matter to be just rushed through Parliament, and indicated that it would be placed before a joint parliamentary committee for discussion. Now, that was the day it was placed in Parliament, it was automatically sent to the JPC. Now, the JPC took a whole lot of time and then came out with some recommendation. Actually, I'm sorry, the bill was redrafted, and in 2019, they added a whole lot of provisions to that, which sort of watered down the guarantees available to citizens and non-citizens in this country. And thereafter, when it was sought to be moved, it was placed before the JPC. The JPC went on for a year and a half, and then at the end of it, it said that we are making these following recommendations to tweak the bill and all that. Now, all that was sent, I think, somewhere 3 months ago or in the previous session. But then, by that time, as I say, there is a very famous Sanskrit quotation, Vinayakam prakurvano rachayamasa vanaram. You start off with trying to make a Ganpati and end up with making a monkey. There is absolutely nothing common between what was originally recommended in 2017 and what is yet to see the light of the day in 2022. Three highlights which I'll point out. And I have often said it from public platforms that if this law is passed as it will turn us into an Orwellian state, and I repeat that today. Because there is excessive power granted to the state to snoop into your data and take away your data without your consent. The rock bottom of the data privacy law is that nobody shall be entitled to take my data without my consent. There are, of course, exceptional circumstances there, which I will not go into right now, because that will take a lot of discussion on the pros and cons. And this is the a card player wants always a joker, because the joker, I suppose, has a number that can always be according to your wishes. So the government wanted a joker in this and said that the government shall be entitled to be exempted from all or any provisions of this act. Now, when it comes to private company, he has to make sure that the data is collected only with consent, make sure the data is processed in accordance with the consent, kept integrity should be absolutely inviolable. And then if there is a leakage or if there is an unauthorized access, the company is responsible for it. And we had recommended that if it is an international company, there should be not less than 4 to 5% of the global turnover. That was intended to be hard-hitting, strong pinching consequence of failure to maintain the integrity of the data. Now the government says, no. And we had also said that across the board, whether it is collected by government agencies, government departments, public corporations or private corporations, the law should be the same. The government says, no, no, no. In this country, government and servants have different law. We don't want this happening. Government should be able to exempt all our departments from any section that we want. Meaning that even the obligation to maintain the data properly is not to be enforced. Now, that is a very serious situation according to me. Now, apart from that, government has got this. There are 3 sections where we had said, hey, you should not touch the person's data, individual's data, unless you have a parliamentary law which is consistent with the parameters laid down in the Supreme Court judgment in Puttaswamy's case. Now, all that has been washed out. The government by an executive fiat can say, no, no, you want somebody's data, you want Mr. Marun Balakrishnan's data, take it tomorrow for the asking, nothing else to be bothered about. So what was originally thought of a personal data protection law now suddenly changed. Why? Because the government said, we'll introduce so many other things. We will also introduce what is known as non-PD, non-personal data. Now, we had recommended in the report, if you have read the report, that non-personal data is another cup of tea or another kettle of fish. Now, it has to be carefully monitored. It has to be carefully tailored for the requirements of the country. And a separate bill has to be passed on that. Now, the government said, oh, no, no, it's not necessary. Let's not call it personal data. If you remember, the original bill was Personal Data Protection Bill. And the act was supposed to be Personal Data Protection Act. They said, no, 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 we'll merge the two. I'm told that when you cook, you don't mix fish, and I'm a vegetarian, but still I've heard from people that you don't mix fish and fowl and cook. You either cook fish, as in Bengal or in Kerala, or you have fowl and you eat it where it is eaten. I have never heard of a dish which contains fish and fowl. This is precisely what the government does. Take the Personal Data Protection Act, cut off the personal data part of it, add non-personal data, and serve it to you for consumption. Now, this is exactly where the problem arises. A, all fundamental rights guarantees liquidated. B, non-personal data introduced by a very surreptitious method in the original bill, in 2019 bill. And what did they do? They had a very, very innocuous looking section 93 or 94 in the bill. It said, oh, wherever non-personal data is there, if the government wants it for the benefit of the people, it should be able to access it. And what is non-personal data? Non-personal data is defined as anything other than personal data. Now, you are all directors of a company. You have board resolutions. You have board policies saying, in the next 10 years, where am I going to get the finance from? How am I going to source the materials, raw material required for me? What should be my business strategy? Am I going to open branches? Am I going to go abroad and do my business? How am I going to beat my competitors? These are essential matters of policy which you people decide and follow it up. And you break the company. Now, as government, I have a free hand. Tomorrow morning, I'll say, come on, Mr. Prasanna's company has got this. I want it to be given to me. Why? Because according to me, it is necessary for the benefit of the country as for the uddhara of the country. Now, if that is the type of free hand that you are giving to the government, I have absolutely no doubt you will turn into an Orwellian state, if not today, whenever the law is passed. Another difficulty is we had thought of a personal data protection as a fundamental right upheld by the Supreme Court. Now nobody is talking of that. Everybody is talking of digital revolution. Then the data is our valuable asset. How to monetize it? There also the difficulty is even non-personal data, apart from private hands, can be in the hands of the government, can be in the hands of public corporations, can be in the hands of private entities. Now, if the government wants, say, for example, collect all the IMD data, the meteorological data, or the plants, plantation data, or the green cover data, fine. If you want to give it to people, by all means do it. That is your lookout. Now, why should the data that is collected by a private company in the course of its business be freely available because somebody gets up and says, this is for the benefit of the country? That is the stage at which I think it is necessary for people to protest. Number one. Number two, we had suggested that when it comes to personal data protection, there should be a regulator, like you have Reserve Bank, or you have the SEBI, or you have the MCA, or the IRDI. Now, we had suggested that there should be an independent regulator who should be able to monitor the data protection laws in the country, interact with different sectors, understand what are their best practices, and evolve it into some kind of a code of ethics, or at least regulations, so that everybody knows what the law in the country is. The concept of independence was thrown into the Arabian Sea when they said that all the persons will be nominated by the government. So it is nothing but the government's own law. I used a very strong word and said lackeys. Well, let me be a little more polite and say government nominees who will be deciding your fate. Now, even today the regulators are subjected to a lot of government restrictions, but if you have all of them packed in one set, we had in fact suggested that there should be an independent board which should select them, which should consist of judges, lawyers, academicians, and persons who are experts in the field. All that is gone to a toss. It will be only the babus who will decide it, and that will decide exactly what is going to happen to this country. And finally, what happened to all that? Hello, suddenly the government has got cold feet. Government has backed again. I think probably I think I'm responsible for all this backtracking of the government, because I kept on saying this repeatedly, and now the government says, no, we will not have a Personal Data Protection Act at all. We will have a Data Protection Act. The personal has been knocked off. Therefore, what started off as personal data protection in order to ensure your data privacy has now turned into some kind of free access into your pocket to take out your data. Now, is this justified? Is this really acceptable to right-thinking people in the country? Needs to be carefully debated, and there can't be a better forum than people from Institute of Directors who are going to be ultimately faced with this issue of how to deal with the issue in their day-to-day business activities. So, gentlemen, I think I've taken more than the time that was allotted to me. Or do I have another 5 minutes, Mr. Prasanna?
Yes. In fact, you have more than 5 minutes, please.
Okay, all right. So therefore, I come back to the same question, that the personal data and non-personal data are immiscible. Why are they immiscible? Water and oil are immiscible. Why are they immiscible? Because water has its own scientific parameters, oil has its own parameters. So if you put them together, you will neither be able to drink it nor will you be able to use it for your starting your car or ship or whatever, airplane or whatever. Therefore, personal data has been declared to be a fundamental right. What is a fundamental right? A fundamental right is something that you cannot short circuit, you cannot abridge unless the parameters laid down by the Supreme Court in several judgments, including the last in the series, the Puttaswamy judgment, are followed. Whereas with regard to non-personal data, there is no fundamental right. So they can take away anytime that you want. But if you put them together, you have a big problem, because there may be occasions when there is mixture of fundamental right and non-fundamental right. So how are you going to say that it is going to be governed and judged by the parameters of the Supreme Court or something other than that? See, all rights are given by Parliament. For example, the right to elect, the Representation of People's Act is a right. It's not a fundamental right. People have a wrong notion. It is not a fundamental right, although it is. Election is fundamental to democracy. The right to elect is not a fundamental. Tomorrow, the Parliament can review it and say, we will not give you the right at all. Hope such a thing doesn't happen in this country, as far as I can see. But with a fundamental right, even the government cannot touch it. Even Parliament unanimously cannot abrogate it unless these constitutional parameters are met. Now, by mixing the two, there is going to be a tremendous amount of difficulty. And the objective seems to be that, hey, there is a lot of data lying around. Why not be appropriated and monetized? As it is, they're doing it. They want to denationalize the banks and take away. They want to take away the salt pan land and sell it off and monetize it. They want to take away the airlines and monetize it. Air India is already and all the Navratna public sector corporations to be monetized. So what's great about monetizing your money and my money? Now, is this justified? Is a thing that needs to be debated publicly and strongly. Apart from that, the difficulty that you people are going to face is you are not sure. Frankly, today we don't even know what the law is. The only law that deals with it is the IT Act, which was never intended to deal with such situations at all. Now, who on earth, when the IT Act was enacted, ever thought that the question of fundamental right would arise? It has some patchy sections about SPDI, what is that? Sensitive personal data, how it is to be transferred, how it is to be given, on section 5, 6, and 7 of the SPDI rules. Now, that is not the law which is going to help us. Now, we are going to compete against whom? European countries, American countries, Southeast Asian countries, China, Russia. Each one of them has a law. Now, I'll tell you another example. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Schrems II judgment. The European court had a very interesting thing to say. A lot of American companies do business in Europe across the Atlantic, and they have a constant dialogue between them and transfer of data. In Europe, GDPR applies. So you can't transfer data unless you are sure there is what is known as the adequacy test. If the GDPR has a certain amount of restrictions with regard to protection of data, whether the other country has similar provision has to be looked in before you can transfer data to such a country. This is a fundamental rule there. Now, that is why the European companies and the American companies entered into what is known as the data, what is that? What is that called? Sorry, I forget the name of that. An agreement. An agreement under which they said that, oh, the law is the same, both sides, the protection is the same, therefore you can freely transfer data between the two countries. One of the commissioners in Europe, I don't remember, Germany or France or some commission, objected to it. And the matter landed up in the European court. The European court said, very interesting thing. The European court said, when the data goes to America, the European company's data goes to America because it is freely transferable under the data shield. They called it the data shield, I think. Now there, the federal law is such that if the president and the federal government want it, they can access any data without asking anybody's consent. They said, hey, this is not going to work. This is not the way we deal with data in our country, in Europe. You can't do this. And they struck down the data shield agreement. They said nothing doing unless the law is the same and there is a test of adequacy is met, you cannot transfer data freely. Now, gentlemen, I don't see any ladies, I'm sorry. Ladies, and if there are any, and gentlemen, the same question will arise tomorrow with regard to India too. We have a lot of trade connections with European countries. Now, if our law is such that it had the same defect which the European court found out with regard to the American government governance, we will have the same problem. Somebody in Europe will say, don't send it to India at all because the Indian government is capable of taking it away without anybody's consent. We will not allow this to happen. And then you have $1 million or €1 million question, which all of you will have to sit and think about how to do the business with Europe, how to do business with any of the other countries where this situation has arisen. When the report was finalized and submitted, everybody in the world congratulated us. I was invited to Europe to participate in a seminar that was organized by the European Commission because they said it is absolutely progressive type of law. I was invited to Singapore to take part in a debate of all the regulators in the Southeast Asian countries where we had people from Korea, China and all that. They said it's a beautiful model law we should all follow. Everybody in the world had followed it. If you look at Singapore, look at Hong Kong, you look at Malaysia, they took pieces of our law and then modulated it to meet local conditions. We are still not sure what our law is going to be. Our house needs to be put into proper order. As and when our government and the parliament decide to put our law into place. And that day, you sit and see what the law is. Today, I don't know what the law is. If somebody asks me, I'll say, I don't know what the law is. The only law I can point out is the IT rules, which is nothing, which is not worth being called a law at all. And friends, this appears to be the situation, and this appears to be the situation in the country. This is exactly what you're going to be faced with. So watch out for your non-personal data. Of course, people don't understand it. People told me, oh, IPR will protect it. IPR is a different issue. IPR does not apply to your board resolution. It won't apply to how you are going to raise finances, whether you're going to issue debt instrument or whether you're going to issue equity instruments, whether you're going to borrow from somebody in Europe or somebody in Switzerland or somebody in China. That is your policy. Your policy will be in a document. That is your data. You will have a lot of number crunching to do. That is your data. And that is non-personal. Because it has nothing to do with anybody. It deals with the company's policy. Now that is open to access. Why it is not protected by fundamental rights? Now, whether that should be accepted or not is a situation. Well, I don't know. You'll have to face that situation someday as and when the law is passed. Parliament will debate it very solemnly for days together. I'm hoping that nowadays I don't see any debate in Parliament. I hope this at least will be debated in Parliament. And then we will all have the benefit of parliamentary wisdom, supplemented by government's wisdom, which you will have to implement in your daily life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
That's all that I need to say. Baki ka parde pe dekhiye.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions. May
I still have
may I ask Sundaresan to please come in?
Yes.
So we have a question from Raghunathan who says, how do we have good enforcement of data protection? Is there a mechanism for common man?
But where is the law? Unless you have a law, what protection can you ask me? If you ask me what was envisaged in the 2017 report, I can give you a clear-cut answer. Data protection was supposed to be monitored by the regulator, namely the Data Protection Authority. Now, just like you have, for example, Provident Fund is a central subject. It's a central law. There is the Central Provident Fund Commissioner. There are the regional Provident Commissioners in each region. They monitor it. Then you have the Factories Act. Chief Inspector of Factories sitting in Delhi, Inspector of Factory in each state. The law is there. Similarly, it was envisaged that there will be a central data protection authority, and maybe inside state and regions, there will be some regional data protection authorities who will monitor it. And there is what is known as privacy by design. Each company would have to look into it and put up on a notice board all the data protection policies. Each company was responsible to ensure that the personnel followed it. Now, for example, after the Vishaka judgment, harassment of women at workplace became a big issue. And then the parliament came out with the law. What does it require you to do? It requires you to have set up committees, monitor it, make somebody answerable for it. You'll have to do that with data protection also. It's partly the responsibility of the monitoring authority, partly the responsibility of individual companies or individuals who hold data. That is the methodology.
But okay, now that you are saying there is no real law in place, we have board members like Prasanna, Arun, and many others in this forum.
Yes.
What would be your advice while they are all sitting on boards as independent directors?
Yes, today what is it that you can do? The only thing is this. You can do one thing, whether the law comes or not. One thing is for sure, that you must protect your data. There is no difficulty on accepting that you must protect your data. Now that you can do by ensuring that there is no hacking, there is no leakage on account of personnel who deal with the data or outsiders who hack your systems and take away your data. You can protect that. That is your responsibility. Just like you will protect your assets against fire or flood or earthquake. You can also protect this. But when the law is made, in what manner you can collect it, what is the type of consent you have to ask for, whether it is possible to do it with consent, without consent. These are the details that the law only can tell us. So, I can tell you what was said in the report, but the report is just thrown in the dustbin. I cannot help you beyond that.
So in your opinion, if there were to be a breach then the directors will not be penalized or cannot be penalized?
I also don't know that what the government is thinking of. We had suggested that the entity should be penalized. And in the case of a government department, the head of the department should be penalized. That was quietly removed. And they said, we'll institute a committee and then some clerk will be found guilty and will be probably sent to jail.
Okay, so in your recommendation, you are saying leave the board of directors alone, just penalize only the company.
Yeah, because we had said board of directors are not really concerned with it. It is the management which is in charge. Say the board of directors, apart from dealing with the agenda on the date of the meeting, what do the board of directors do? Do they do now? If there is a fraud in the company, just they tell me, is the individual director, whether he is executive director, non-executive director, or independent director, does he check all the vouchers? Yes, theoretically yes, but then there is a limit to which you can carry it.
So basically, in your opinion, now the government has backtracked or
totally backtracked. Backtracked by why only I just flipped a somersault. I don't know what they're thinking about. I have never understood what was originally thought of because of the Supreme Court's decision in Puttaswamy judge that you shall protect the right of privacy of data of individuals as if no, it is fundamental right. So what is it? Therefore, there was a law. In fact, the committee was appointed because the Supreme Court asked a very pointed question and said, where is the law in the country? Today, I'm asking the same question and saying, where is the law in the country?
Okay. So one last question, sir. Before plus, I'll just so today, if you really look at it, whether it's Aadhaar card for a common man or whether it is director-related information, all the information has been given to the government, wherever.
Yes.
If the data goes out of the system,
yes, who is responsible?
Sir.
Yes, we said the government department is responsible. The secretary in charge of the department should answer for this. How did it go out? I gave it to him. You see, if you remember, when they came out with this, what was it called? When COVID started, they came out with this, what is that? Not Ayushman. Something that some...
Arogya Setu.
Arogya Setu. Arogya Setu was started by some unauthorized fellows. Because under the Act, the Epidemic Act, there is a particular authority which can issue directions. Some two fellows issued a notification, and so I openly said in a public meeting and said, this is wholly unconstitutional and illegal. You cannot collect all this because this is my fundamental right, and you cannot take my fundamental right unless there is a proper law enforcement. And then what happened? Government backtracked, no? They could say, no, it's not mandatory now. Otherwise, if you remember when they initially said, without Arogya Setu, I will not allow you to get onto a plane, get onto a train or something of that sort. Then they quietly backtracked and said, no, you have to give only a declaration and go. Oh. This is the problem. You see, there is no long-term thinking at all. It is a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, if there is some pain in the toe, do something. If then the pain in the toe becomes some pain in the knee, do something. Or why don't you take a holistic view and say, make sure that your whole body is properly taken care of.
Okay. Now that there is no law, sir,
yes.
What would be your advice to?
My advice is today you are sitting in a situation where you don't know which way the cat is going to jump.
Okay.
But one thing is sure, you have to protect your milk, whichever way the cat jumps.
Yes.
So your milk is your data, whether it is your personal data or non-personal data. Make sure that it is protected, and the protection has to come because of two reasons. One is your own employee may be leaking it. Your employee may be unauthorizedly accessing it, or an outsider may be hacking into your system and taking it. Yeah. Please protect it at that level. Thereafter, how it is to be collected, under what circumstances, consent, without consent, whether it can be sent abroad, whether it cannot be shared with some other company abroad, whether the adequacy test will be met, whether the government has the right to access it, under what circumstances, whether the investigation departments of the government can do it. All this has to be factored into in the law by the government, in the bill, and whatever parliament decides.
Till then, your advice is
keep your house in check. No, keep your, see, even without this act, wouldn't you have done that?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's all. Let's keep doing it. That's all. Now, today we don't know when the government will authorize a man to come into my house. But till that happens, I'll keep my house intact. Whatever is there, I'll keep my windows intact. I'll keep my lock intact. If tomorrow the government says, no, my policeman has the right to walk through your eyes, well, I'll see whether it can be done or not. If there is any country, any judge in the court who is going to help me or not, we'll see at that time. Yeah. But at the moment, keep your house in order, keep your data secure from whatever you can. Of course, see, security of data is a complicated issue because the cyber technology keeps evolving every hour, according to me. Because what is there today may not be the technology tomorrow. But to the best of its ability, you can do it. I mean, there's a limit to which you can jump with the cyber technologies. You can do whatever you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, Press.
Thank you. Justice B.N. Sri Krishna. As is customary, I must have the last question for you.
Yes, please.
Since the entire matter is before the JPC,
It is not before the JPC. JPC has washed off its hands. The government is now stuck in a situation because when a JPC makes a tweak in the bill, that bill has to be passed as tweaked by the JPC. The government cannot make any change in that. So the government is now thinking of scrapping the bill and coming out with some new law. That is the point. So there has to be a new bride found before the marriage can go through.
Will you be
the marriage is over, finished. Oh, not even marriage.
Will you be the priest again?
No, please, I'm tired now. I'm 81. I'm 81. What do you expect me to do?
Thank you so much, sir. You have presented the whole thing so mirthfully, but yet very, very touching and very, in fact.
It's a serious matter. If I start thinking about it, I'll start crying. Therefore, I make it a point to laugh along with you.
Thank you very much. We are very grateful. On behalf of IOD, I thank you for accepting our invitation and addressing us. And we look forward to having such opportunities. This was planned to be a physical meeting.
I know. I was looking forward to it to come to Bangalore and then address you guys.
And hopefully we will have another occasion when we would request you to come down to Bangalore and address us in person on another topic. Thank you very much. And thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
All that I can say is best of luck. Do whatever you can. Save yourself till the situation changes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was indeed a very revealing and insightful talk. And, he spoke about the topic in a lighter vein, but there was actually a note of caution that was constantly being sounded. You watch your back was essentially the message that Justice B.N. Sri Krishna was actually giving to all of us. So we have to take that very seriously. We have the privilege of having amongst us Professor S. Raghunath, IIM Bangalore. He specializes in digital business strategy and strategic leadership. And Professor S. Raghunath is a member of the Board of Studies of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. He was a global director of the International Masters Program for Practicing Managers. His work has focused on themes in corporate governance, such as differing roles of company boards, strategic decisions and execution oversight, contribution of independent directors, and the implication of data privacy, cybersecurity, and risk management for board members. He's a certified trainer in corporate governance by the Global Corporate Governance Forum, sponsored under the aegis of the World Bank, an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that's OECD for you, and administered by the International Finance Corporation, Washington. He has been offering the company directors program on board best practices for the past 15 years. He was a visiting professor at the Graduate School of Business, Stanford University, where he engaged in research in strategy making in IT companies. He was also a visiting professor at INSEAD, France, HEC Paris, Euromed, Marseille, University of Buckingham, UK, RMIT School of Business, Melbourne, Australia. And we are indeed grateful that today Professor S. Raghunath is amongst us, and we are very eager to listen to him on the data protection and the role of the board. Data protection and the role of the board. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mr. Prasanna Mysore, for your kind introduction. And, I was just wondering, why would not Justice Sri Krishna stay with us for some more time? It is such a delight and a singular opportunity listening to him, and the way you raise those questions and the kind of interactions we have had. These are rare opportunities in anybody's life. So thank you so very much for providing this very delightful set of circumstances when we are talking about things which you would never talk about or deliberate about. I would like to thank Mr. Arun Balakrishnan, Brigadier Rajiv Kapoor, and your kind self, and other distinguished panelists and friends who are present here. It is indeed my pleasure and privilege to present some thoughts and understanding of data protection and the role of board in the webinar that you have organized. I must say that I was so eager for Justice Sri Krishna to continue, but alas, it all ended. All of us know that boards are mechanisms which are primarily a validating process in terms of value creation by an entity and the kind of value appropriation that happens in an entity, right? For profit and even not for profit entities. So we sitting on the board are scrutinizing actions and transactions. We are looking at the fairness in wealth distribution. We are looking at financial reporting. We are overseeing surveillance mechanisms and potential abuses. And it is in this context, especially in this pandemic times, when people and companies with their key talent actually strewn all over a geographical space, they are not there together for the exigencies which have been created by the pandemic. So it has not been a choice for companies to have this geographically distributed set of managers, executives, and others to work with them. So primarily seamless connectivity, secure access, and a way to track productivity has become one of the key considerations today for any business enterprise. In this scenario, there was a survey conducted where chief executives were asked, what are the initiatives that your company would have in terms of business priorities over the next 12 months? And the answer was reduce cost, accelerate shift to digital business, and of course, embrace corporate social responsibility practices more seriously than what we had done before. And when they were asked what kind of technology initiatives would the company prioritize over the next 12 months, predominantly the answer was about developing smart connected products or assets enabled by the internet. So just as Justice Sri Krishna was explaining so lucidly, that organizations are transforming with data without a choice. We have reached a situation where boards are now being very sensitive to what management is doing and about the plans that they have to adopt new technologies And there is always this question whether these new technologies will align with the company's data strategy, which was never predominant as a priority earlier. Because the risk oversight part of work is now beginning to show up on the radar. And going forward, not just the unicorns, not just the smaller tech companies, but even larger companies who are actually subsuming the advantage of being able to use AI and IoT. And now we have a drone policy coming up. We have 5G, which is just about to be introduced. All of this will bring robotics also into play. And data collection is going to be very pervasive, very critical to business. And companies are going to really benefit from the proliferation of data these technologies provide. But on the other hand, if you look at social norms, which is what Justice Sri Krishna was talking about, and the expectations about being trustworthy when technologies are being utilized to collect customer data, and about how this data is being used. So boards obviously have questions like, you're bringing so much of investment into these technologies, and these have privacy implications and risks attached to it. And if we are really not going to address these issues, they may turn off customers and even employees. So just to build trust, we will forget the regulation and the law. Just to build trust, companies have to put in control, a set of controls in place around security, data privacy, the ethics that drives data privacy while deploying technologies. So common privacy controls, including collecting, retaining, sharing the smallest amount of personal data necessary to perform a service in a manner so that it does not cause harm to individuals, might actually impact reputations. And therefore, the company needs to be sure that any technology deployed used to collect and access data is secure. It follows fair and ethical protocols, because one fine day, all of this will come to roost. And being on the board, board members obviously will have to know whether there is a very clear data strategy that the company follows, and it has the capabilities to actually make sure that the reputation is not tarnished going ahead. Given the fact that when you use advanced technologies and companies are thinking of making that as part of their stable of offerings and creating augmented products, there's a lot of M&A which is happening in acquiring these companies. And the due diligence which is going into these companies today is checking whether the acquired entity has weak data privacy governance. Because the return on investment could be dramatically reduced, particularly if issues turn up, which will go and damage the brand and obviously the reputation of the company. So if you look at M&A going forward, the contract language actually looks at purchase price adjustments. It can be a clawback clause. We have distinguished lawyers here, right? That if the target has data privacy issues, companies don't want to buy unknown risk. So privacy due diligence now is procedural in nature, it's also technical in nature, data flow mapping, and an overall review of the company culture and values is something that is coming into play. So boards are at a point where sooner or later they may have to check how effective is their company's data strategy. As Justice Sri Krishna was mentioning, all these entities collect all kinds of personally identifiable information for all different reasons. Sometimes companies want to grow sales and revenue, while others use data to retain customers and improve the customer experience. So in order to capitalize on this data, companies have, or they are being forced to have, good data strategy. Too often, we all know this, that the data companies collect is either incomplete, in many cases unreliable, or sometimes there is simply too much of it. So the capability to understand, map out the data, and also know how to cleanse data is something that our technology friends, especially for Mindtree, would be in that business, and then they understand it very deeply. That companies really need to have a data strategy that is based on current and projected business and data use goals. They also need to design applications around the strategy and have an effective, as far as possible. We know this problem of cybersecurity, cyber threat. It's an evolving game. These guys are always ahead of the totality of the IP and the intelligence that normal human beings have, right? So the related effective privacy compliance programs can actually give companies a competitive edge. So we are reaching a point where companies need to be stewards of the data that they collect and be sure that they are actually having a secure and ethical way of using it. And they are also trying to build controls in a manner in which it can be protected from breach. Cannot be guaranteed, as our technology friends will tell us, and also from irresponsible use. So the ability to purge any high-risk data that a company no longer needs is an important arena that should be addressed, because that can actually pose a big risk. So what are we saying then? We are saying that data is going to transform business models, the way customers are accessed, the way we improve performance, the way we actually provide an experience, and all of that. But in this story, as Justice Sri Krishna was saying, that companies can become vulnerable to crossing ethical lines.
So there is a very strong requirement in terms of investing in data governance to create more transparency around how they use and store data, and also build data ethics controls into marketing, data research, development, and product design functions. So boards probably will have to ensure that there are ethical assessments conducted of data use to ensure the benefits and the risks are balanced. So in board conversations, members will have to talk to the management about the company's data strategy and get updates as management make changes. They probably have to understand a little bit more about the company's data goals and discuss whether there are any ethical issues around using personal data. And boards will want to ask management whether it has the right processes and controls in place to mitigate risks to data and how it is being used. So we are at this point in the present between a past which is beyond recovery and a future yet to be, in terms of addressing what is possible and what is ethical. You know, when we are of course grappling with the law now and with regulation in terms of privacy and use of data. But for companies and organizations, what is more critical is to do an inquiry about what is the context of the data. Are the appropriate consent and choices given? Is the organization's data collection reasonable? And this very difficult question about who owns the data to be collected from customers, and is every party that handles data accountable? The reason why I say this is the ethics and appropriateness of collecting, using, and selling customer data. This behavior culminating from many years of commercial activity with the objective of monetizing data actually poses a question to the management, and therefore for the board to ask, is this practice acceptable? Does it align with our corporate strategy? What compliance issues present themselves for engaging in such strategies? And where do we draw the line? So the board obviously needs an understanding as to what are the strategic underpinnings, and data collection and management, as well as compliance with regulations, maybe less of an issue for B2B organizations, given that they are likely to be managing data, which is for certain key accounts, and not managing large data sets of consumer information. However, boards serving these companies still need to determine whether management understands if and where consumers are touched as part of ongoing data collection and management process. And only by doing this will they actually understand where the risk with that data is sourced. So with regard to privacy, board members, in my view, need to consider three important interrelated issues. One relating to compliance, two relating to ethics, three relating to corporate strategy. And that is what a director should ask. How is the organization dealing with the diverse standards that exist globally and of course nationally? And how effective are the company's compliance processes in meeting current data privacy concerns? And are we really promoting responsible privacy practice, given today's optics and for the organization specifically? Is managing and using the company's data about just merely ensuring regulatory compliance or doing the right thing, or both? These are very, very strong and very deep questions. And they indeed need to be addressed, because boards actually need a standard. They need a North Star with regard to overseeing the organization's data and privacy management. And the directors need a clear understanding regarding data and privacy with regard to the balance between risk, that is protecting the organization, and strategy in terms of innovation and growing the organization. Thank you very much.
There may be a couple of minutes for one or two questions. Jays?
Yeah. Okay, that was a good one. I mean, I take from where you had left on that who owns the data, Professor. Now, there are three breaches that can happen for a board member. One is breach of duty, breach of trust, breach of confidentiality. Now, from your perspective, I mean, I know you mentioned that there are too many lawyers and let them take the call, but from your viewpoint, which one do you think would hurt the independent director the most?
I think the fiduciary part, see, the duty part, we have to be seen as actually administrating adequate care, right? So, I mean, in a practical sense, there are three aspects to this. One is, of course, the people aspect, as Justice Sri Krishna was doing. What would you do if there are guys inside who are doing this, right? So there is this aspect about the CISO, the Chief Information and the Security Officer, and his mandate, the kind of dashboards we have, the process we have. So people, process, technology are joined at the hip. But we should understand, and I hope regulators and lawmakers understand this well in the future, that navigating this business of data protection and cybersecurity is a very daunting task. Very daunting. Cyber threat actors are always ahead. They have creative ways to disrupt digital systems and access information, always ahead. So in spite of whatever we do, and this is going to get worse. Why will it get worse? We will have indirect entry points through IoT, connected devices, third party along the supply chain. So, this is going to go way beyond the four walls of the company. So, any effort to build, implement, maintain an effective system, that's definitely going to be a challenge. Definitely going.
From a viewpoint of, see, the whole issue is whenever there is a breach, the first question that anybody asks is, where was the board? I mean, very common question in corporate world, where was the board? Now, in case I need some protection from whatever little, from an independent director point of view, where should I have taken some care from your study point of view, or what are the right questions that I should have asked?
So, yeah, sure. So, you see, let us say that there has been an attack and everybody is being questioned and the board being asked, where the hell were you, right?
Yeah.
The simple thing is, you see, all this comes to this one adage which the Americans use very well. They say, do you put your money where your mouth is? You understand? So, do we really invest in tools that improve the speed of detection, response, and recovery? It's a very big question. Do we have adequate training and education throughout the various levels in the organization? Because those of us who understand this more than anybody else, data protection and cyber security is everybody's responsibility. It doesn't sit at a certain level. It just goes way across. So to improve the security technology infrastructure is a very big deal. And we all know nation states are behind this. It is not just e-crime. Nation states are behind this, and we all know who the suspects are, right? We don't need to mention them so openly. We know who they are. So yeah, so security, data protection is not for the board and just the senior management. It is the entire company's responsibility. It has to permeate the process. It is about creating a culture which actually brings performance management objectives which in alignment to this, and saying, boss, did you ensure that there is data protection and we are ensuring cybersecurity? So
Thank you.
Going forward, it is a very big thing. And obviously, you're right. The accountability extends to the board. Obviously, there will be questions. But we should know that this is not an easy game. Absolutely not.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Professor. We are slightly behind schedule, and I do hope Professor Raghunath can stay on with us. It would be our privilege to have you with us, and particularly to encourage the panelists who are going to come after this speaker. It promises to be a very good panel, and I appreciate if you can please stay on with us. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We have the next address, Digital Enterprise, Balancing Innovation and Privacy, Obligations under the DPB 2021 by Anand Krishnan, Manager, Policy and Data Security Council of India. And I will very briefly mention that as manager, he identifies technology, privacy, and security-related policy issues and developing policy positions for advocacy. He is a recognized Fellow of Information Privacy by International Association of Privacy Professionals. He holds a BA LLB degree from the University School of Law and Legal Studies, IPO University, and a Master's Science degree in Cyber Law and Information Security from the National Law Institute, which is University Bhopal. So, Anand Krishnan, we are very happy that you are with us. And I would also like to tell you that you are supposed to start at 5:25 and conclude at 5:40. But since we are behind schedule, we certainly would like you to start now at 5:35 and perhaps close it at about 5:50 or 5:55. Thank you. Thank you so much. Go ahead, please, Anand Krishnan. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just quickly check if everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Awesome. I'll just quickly share my screen.
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you very much. I was also listening to Professor Raghunath's address, and I think we will find a lot of similarities, especially in the first portion of the presentation where we talk about innovation and sort of the type of digitization that we're experiencing these days. And we'll sort of talk about how, what are the strategies for an organization in terms of creating that sort of balance between data-driven innovation and creating trust with the consumer. So What we see at the moment in terms of digitization and data usage largely is data being specifically utilized to enhance experiences that an individual is sort of having in terms of their interaction with a specific application or product. And this has sort of become the norm in terms of the individual expecting a certain elevated personalized experience. And that's sort of what has become an incredibly big market differentiator. We also see utilization of digitization technologies and just data in general for increasing productivity, and so it's also sort of testing the possibilities that we have in terms of what potentially can be created. And we see a lot of boundaries of what is possible being tested these days in terms of with the whole development that we're seeing in the Web 3.0 and the metaverse conversation. So we've seen the data enrichment is an incredibly important part of enriching products and services, designing for mobility, designing for interfaces with different APIs, which essentially lead to integration and data sharing and collaboration cross-platform. And that is sort of the future that we see in terms of data usage. It becomes incredibly important in this context to understand the accountability and the sort of responsibility that exists between these different entities that sort of play a role in the overall engagement with the consumer. Platformization is another important sort of development that we have seen over the years, where we see companies sort of moving from just being seen as just one single unit providing a specific service, but a platform or an aggregator of specific services being provided to individuals. While we've seen all of these sort of things emerging, but this is not without a level of distrust that has sort of emerged with the consumer because of the utilization and ubiquitous utilization of their data. And frankly, a lot of this sort of problem or this distrust that we've seen emerging these days is largely through information asymmetry that exists between the individual and the organization. The individual essentially is not able to connect the dots and understand why certain processing activities are happening, right? Why are they being offered certain types of services, and why are they receiving certain types of advertisements, etc. And that's where the major sort of steps need to be taken by organization in terms of creating that trust between them and the individual. There are different sort of pathways and narratives that organizations can do. And of course, it all starts with having a cultural commitment within the organization in terms of privacy. Some of these sort of challenges that we've seen over the years have been around, let's say, sort of collection, processing, and storage of data. There is a lot of conversation. So I've been involved in the conversation around the data protection bill in India since 2017, ever since the establishment of the Justice Shri Krishna Committee. And we've seen a lot of sort of questions, etc., being coming up in terms of different types of data activities that the organization performs on data. I'll take the example of one, data storage. Something the new law is talking about, and all the other sort of draft laws have been talking about, is having a defined storage period for retention of data. And that is itself a practice which is not necessarily uniformly being practiced across India in the Indian sort of company ecosystem. Hence, these sort of communication in terms of, what type of retention processes you have, all of these things need to be communicated, or you should have established processes within the organization to back them up as well. And finally, the risk, of course, that exists in terms of it could be greater regulatory scrutiny. We see that everything, let's say, sort of a social media company gets under a lot more scrutiny in terms of their sort of previous activities that they might have been involved in. There are risks in terms of brand risk. I usually take this example when I'm taking lectures is how this also has become part of the changing narrative that organizations have in terms of their overall marketing outreach as well. Over 4 or 5 years ago, Apple was sort of Apple's main pitch was the exclusivity, the ecosystem, etc. And suddenly over the last 2-3 years, Apple is all about privacy. And this change is come because of this, of that sort of connection and communication that you want to build with the consumers or the individuals whose data that you would be using. And how do we sort of talk about cultivating trust and demonstrating accountability, right? I mean, we've sort of, we know that it is an important factor, but what are sort of the measures which are able to demonstrate accountability? It is, privacy compliance has reached that stage. Just saying that they are accountable or you are accountable is not enough. It is important to have a demonstration of through different practices and processes within your organization that you are accountable and you are committed to privacy. Say, for example, establishing a leadership and oversight of data protection, adopting a privacy risk-based approach to privacy, and also sort of providing transparency to all stakeholders in terms of, the reinforcing the company values when it comes to handling of data. And we see this in a lot of privacy sort of mature organizations, which each sort of different departments and functions have privacy champions that have essentially sort of report into a larger oversight board in terms of regulating and checking and creating that sort of ethical balance in terms of what we should be doing with data and what sort of direction overall our innovation should go in. In terms of the other factors that need to be taken into consideration is how to sort of operationalize these claims that we've made in terms of accountability. So having a larger data governance process, having a privacy attention to the overall sort of GRC process, sort of existence of written policies and procedures. Training is an incredibly important factor in terms of internalizing privacy within an organization. So it's training plus awareness. And it is important to have intelligence around how do you plan this training and awareness. What we need is sort of bite-sized sort of training modules which are associated, let's say take HR for that example. So you have training modules specifically designed to sort of educate the specific HR handling of data in their specific context. And that's where we're seeing a lot of privacy training and awareness heading towards. Now, finally, in terms of cultivating consumer trust and what sort of, a lot of these things are going to be outward facing and outward communication and trying to establish that relationship between the organization and the individual. So it is important to assess, what your privacy notices are. How are you communicating with the individual? Are you trying to have a dialogue, or are you just, letting them go through this massive 10-page legalese document to figure out what you're doing with their data? Hence, it's essential to sort of, it is not necessary for you to just use this method of having this very detailed sort of contract-like communication with the individual. Privacy notices could be communicated in context to the data collection what the individual is doing, what is happening with respect to the individual. It can be through videos and interactive sort of conversations. This will become incredibly important when the privacy law comes in India, because it is a responsibility of the organization to make sure that all of this information and privacy notice is communicated to the individual in an understandable manner. And this problem gets amplified when we talk about the general sort of digital literacy and sort of the digital divide that exists in terms of India. We see that we are bringing the next billion onto sort of digital services, and it will be essential how we communicate what are their sort of things that they should take care of and what their responsibilities are also, and who are accountable to them as well. Having a privacy-centric sort of mission statement is essential. It is also important to have a user-centric design. And I think this is very important, and this has sort of become the norm of the product ecosystem. That is essentially having more empathy towards the individual who would be utilizing your product. This is known as the design thinking and empathy-centric approach, where you are creating products to give the individual an enhanced user experience, and making sure that while you're collecting data with the individual, you are making sure that privacy by design and default practices are being undertaken and made part of your larger sort of SDLC product development life cycles within your organization. And we see this being operationalized through legislations now. We see a lot of focus on privacy by design as a concept. We see several legislations over the years have been in adopting privacy by design as an approach, and sort of the Indian law as well talks about the sort of the latest version of the data protection bill talks about having a privacy by design policy within the organization, talking about how they would actually go about making sure that these sort of safeguards are built into the products and services that are being provided to the individual. Now, we've seen the data sort of innovation landscape that exists, and what are the sort of different ways in which we can try to marry the two in terms of having certain core elements of accountability and trying to operationalize accountability and cultivating the user trust. Now, what we'll do is we'll try to understand, and I'll sort of draw parallels in terms of what we are seeing and how these are being reflected in the emerging obligations that are coming in under the data protection bill, the 2021 version that we saw in December. Just a quick timeline for those who might not be familiar. The whole process essentially started with the 2018 Justice Sri Krishna Committee deliberations. They came out with a draft bill. Then the bill went to MeitY. Then the Ministry of Electronics came out with another version that went through another period of public consultation. Then we had a joint parliamentary committee being established under the chairmanship of Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi. We had the good fortune of representing our opinions before the joint parliamentary committee as well. And ultimately, when the committee ended its deliberations, under the chairmanship of P.P. Chaudhary, we came out with the JPC report. Alongside, we had a new version of the personal data protection bill. And that was one of the changes that happened. They dropped the word personal from the formulation, hence having a wider application of the law. Now, in terms of sort of just general news and conversations that we have been having in terms of the government stakeholders, we see this coming up again around the monsoon sessions. We might see this being tabled around that timeline. This may be with certain changes, or they are at liberty to just take the version as it is and sort of move forward as well. In terms of what the report essentially talked about, I'll quickly go through this. There were a few elements of, let's say, conversations around how long the period should be, the transition period, and sort of the other factors, let's say, some newer elements being sort of discussed within the legislation. We saw certain things. These are, of course, our assessment as an organization. You may have your own. We saw several things like there was a lot of conversation around critical data. We still didn't find any definition of what critical data would be or any essential ingredients that would qualify something being categorized as critical data within the organization. We still saw retention of offenses against sort of certain companies or criminal offenses within the legislation, which of course is a problematic concern for the industry at large. We also saw several sort of factors being included in terms of restrictions of data flows. There were some positives as well. We saw sort of removal of passwords essentially from the classification of sensitive personal data, which is essentially society harm driven. And we don't really necessarily see password fitting into that equation. In terms of sort of other obligation that we saw emerging within the law, specifically under the Data Protection Bill 2021, were the data principal rights, and this will be a major obligation on the organization. There was a conversation earlier about sort of having a fiduciary responsibility in terms of handling and processing this data. And this becomes incredibly important in the context of rights execution. And it is going to be the main client organization which would be responsible for operationalizing rights of the individuals. And these rights are broadly right to access confirmation, right to correction and erasure, portability, and right to be forgotten. A larger sort of display of in terms of transparency and accountability practices, we see that the bill is talking about sort of some differentiation of obligations. So there are basically three categories of entities which would be regulated under the law. We'll have a significant data fiduciary, which would be required to conduct data protection impact assessment, maintain records, having a data protection officer. And we have a data fiduciary, which is akin to, let's say, a data controller, which will have these, let's say, the second most amount of obligations to implement, and the data processor and the service provider ecosystem, which would have the minimum amount of direct obligations placed on them. But essentially, they would be required to meet several of these obligations through contractual means. So we see that all of these things that we were talking about in terms of accountability practices and how to sort of cultivate trust, let's say, like having privacy by design policy in place, having a data protection officer in place, having sort of mandatory reporting mechanisms in terms of breaches, are sort of ways in which we are seeing these obligations being translated into the legislation as well in terms of compliance requirements. And there is also requirements in terms of specific obligations in terms of processing of children's data as well. So this would be another factor to take into consideration, especially when you're innovating around or providing services to children. And finally, there are other obligations in terms of processing and transfer of data. I wouldn't go too much into detail here. I saw that the next panel would be covering several of these factors, as say the sort of conditions for transfer. But we see there will also be obligations in terms of localization of data, in terms of sensitive personal data and critical personal data within the organization. So thank you very much. With this,
thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Anand. It was really, we're very sorry that we had to hurry you through this presentation, which I think was very, very interesting. But I wish you had a little more time, but that's how, we always come under some time pressure. But we do hope that we will have an opportunity of interacting with you, and also maybe have sometime another session when we can get into more drill down details of your presentation. Thank you, Anand. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a nice day.
We are now moving on to the panel discussion, data governance and cross-border data flow compliance. The moderator is Sonal Basu, and the panelists are Chandan Pani, Chief Information Security Officer, Mindtree, Mr. Rajesh Kumar, Senior Group Manager, Data Protection Office, Infosys, Mr. P. Mayuran, Partner, Cybersecurity, KPMG, Mr. RG, and Sonal will actually moderate the three panelists. And I don't want to get into a very detailed introduction in the interest of time. Sonal Basu is the General Counsel of Mindtree, and I've had the privilege of working with her as Independent Director of Mindtree. So I know her, an extremely competent person. And so did I interact with Chandan Pani, the Chief Information Security Officer of Mindtree. Rajesh Kumar, Senior Group Manager, and Rajesh is a very well-known person who speaks on public platforms on all of these issues. And of course, Mr. P. Mayuran, Partner, Cybersecurity, KPMG. And he has, of course, a lot of things to his credit. I won't go to that very much in detail in the interest of time, but I'll hand over to Sonal to please commence the panel discussion proceedings. Over to you, Sonal.
Thank you, Pras, and thank you for the generous introduction. It's always a pleasure interacting with you. And good evening, everyone. I would just like to start with the fact that we all are in the digital economy. We are in the world of metaverse, and collection of data is not confined to personal information anymore. It's getting extended to, assessing brain waves, understanding the physiological responses, etc. Right? So we are in a very, very expanded and vulnerable world. And with that, I would like to request Mayuran to give his view in terms of why the need for data governance.
Sure. Hi, Sonal. Good evening, everyone. So I think it's an interesting question, Sonal. I mean, I think there is a long way to answer this question, and there is also a short way to answer this question. Probably I'll attempt the shorter way, right? So data governance, I think before even you jump into data governance, one of the key things I think everybody is kind of arguing with is data privacy, right? So, I mean, when we had conversation with many of our clients 4 years back when GDPR came into existence, I mean, how are you kind of being compliant with GDPR? The common response is saying that we have kind of updated the notice, right? I mean, as if we are kind of gone through the first few articles of GDPR, everybody said, okay, we have done, so we are compliant, right? So slowly they realized saying that that is not sufficient. There are a lot of other expectations from regulations, right? I'm just taking an example of GDPR because many people here would be relevant with GDPR as we extensively work with that part of the world. But there are PDPA of Singapore, Malaysia, so on and so forth. I think all of them are quite similar in many ways, right? So while they started looking at this as an option to kind of be compliant, as I mentioned, they slowly realized that notice or doing a data protection impact assessment or doing a ROPA, which is the records of processing activities, are not sufficient, right? Because still there are a lot of loopholes. I mean, there could potential data breach could be there, so on and so forth. So then the thinking actually started broadening. I mean, they started looking at how do we kind of converge data protection with data privacy, right? And slowly they realized that there should be more data protection controls put in place. All this encryption and what are the protection controls, DLP, so on and so forth, became pretty relevant. While doing all these things, suddenly there was a realization, I mean, while we are handling the PIAs, SPIs, what happens to the rest of the data, right? I mean, that becomes critical because if you look at the way our regulation is also evolving, right? It is not going to be only personal information. It is going to be non-personal information also. So then the realization came saying that, I mean, if you have to manage all these things, fundamentally, we have to have a better data governance, right? I mean, rather than kind of bottom-up approach, it is better to take a top-down approach where you govern the data irrespective of the nature of data in a better manner to ensuring data quality or metadata tagging, so on and so forth. Then it becomes much easier to be compliant to the privacy requirements. That is a realization, right? But to be honest, are we able to do it the way we want? Many organizations are still kind of haggling with that. Well, they're doing well in the privacy point of view, but looking from a kind of a broader view, there is a long way to go. Sorry, maybe my short answer sounds still longer, but yeah, this is probably the best way to cover this.
No, you're bang on, and I really like the fact that there is a lot of conversions that's happening, right, vis-a-vis privacy and protection. So that's an important element. Thank you for that. Chandan, what has changed in the last few years? You've been with the industry for so long, and you're the CISO. So we would like to hear your perspective on this.
Okay, so personally, I think I'm getting less sleep with every passing day. Now, moving to the other side, what exactly has changed over the years? Let's go back and look at the source from where all this started, right? And probably that is what is your internet. Now, today, in last 32 years, 70% of the world population has got access to internet, right? And 90% of them have mobile device with which they're accessing internet. Now, the amount of data that we generate today is close to 80 zettabytes. Now, if I want to define quote unquote what is zettabyte, then 1 followed by 21 zeros, right? I don't want to count that. Probably that's the amount of data we are generating today. Now, how? So I think some of us, we have already answered it. IoT, mobile device, edge computing, smart car, smart home, personal devices, Internet of body. Now that's a new concept which we are talking about, Internet of body, where you connect a body to internet, right? And if you want to see what exactly is changing when we are having this discussion, right? If you look at some of the statistics, now Google processes 5.7 million searches per minute. That is what is the volume that they process per minute. So as we speak, that's what is going on. 65,000 photos are getting posted on Insta. Now 280K spent on Amazon globally. And these are all minute by minute statistics. Now 6 million people are doing online transaction. 900 Zoom calls like this are live as of now globally, right? And the list is endless, right? Now this is what we are talking about, digitization and digitalization. Now the entire world is talking about digitizing something or moving into digitalization. Now because of this, what is happening is there's a global word called data universe, right? Everybody is pumping data, and this data universe is getting stronger every day, and it never sleeps, and it is not slowing down. And that's where the problem is starting. Now there are different kinds of industries that are there. If you look at tech industry, likes of your Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft and few others, right? They are generating data, they are generating technologies, they are collecting data. Now, your financial industry, probably if you look at banking 10 years ago and banking now, completely different, right? Now, combine this to fintech industry, look at UPI. UPI is already crossing probably 1 billion transactions per day. And I'm talking about India only, right? Now, this is what is, we are talking in terms of data generation. Look at healthcare. In last 2 years, COVID alone has generated so much of data. I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that, right? Then we are talking about personal data. We are talking about probably retail data, right? Every retail player today knows what brand, what choice, what color individual prefers. And that is what is data is available with the entire world in a data universe. Now, from there, slowly things are moving and all this data is coming to either a controller or a processor, right? Essentially, that's where we come into the picture, right? Somebody is a controller or somebody is a processor, somebody is going to work on that. Now, all this data coming to either a storage or to a database or to a data lake or to an application, probably there are so many other avenues are there. But on top of that, there is a change which is going on in terms of technology. The technology is moving much faster. I think Justice Krishna mentioned earlier that technology is moving probably very fast. Every hour things are changing. We are talking about blockchain. We are talking about biometric analytics. We are talking about cryptocurrency. We are talking about AI, ML, 5G. We are talking about AR, VR, and finally metaverse, right? So this is what is happening from a technology point of view. Some of these technologies are replacement technologies, like so UPI. UPI changed the world in 2 years. But some of the technology are very fundamental. So, for example, if you look at blockchain is around the corner for the last few hours, but slowly and steadily it is changing applications. It is changing the world, right? It will take some time, but definitely we're going to see more and more applications on blockchain. Now, to support all this infrastructure, right? Cloud, storage, data center, they are coming up. Now, a few years ago, setting up data center, hell of a task. You need at least a couple of months to set up a data center. Now, today, we just need a couple of hours. I just need a couple of hours to set up a data center, right? Now, that is what is technology today, right? What was there earlier. Now, with all this, there are two other parties who are also equally interested in the entire saga. One, regulators. There's a sense of urgency by them to regulate everything, whatever we spoke now, right? Now, the other party, your threat actors or the bad actors. See, for them, the challenges are completely different. We have never heard of company paying 40 million as a ransom, but it happened a couple of quarters ago. Right? We have seen 40 million, 20 million, 30 million as a ransom. Now, this ransomware also has changed over the period of time. Earlier, they used to encrypt, they used to ask money. Now, they're not only doing that, they are ensuring that the data is publicly available, and they're also trying to negotiate and figure out what else you have in your downstream, probably your customers, your clients, your partners, etc. So there are also significant changes happening from a ransomware point of view. Now, cyber warfare, which was probably not heard earlier, today we all know what is going on. Now, large-scale cyber attacks. Earlier, things were probably very, very small. If you look at colonial pipeline, now that's where the impact came to citizens. People are impacted. Let's say if a smart grid is not available, that's where people are impacted. Now, this is probably the change which is going to continue. More and more things are going to get complicated. More and more technology are going to be mainstream. But from a CISO point of view, I would say all these changes are going to continue and give me more sleepless nights.
That's right. And that's where I like Professor Raghunath's comment on ethical assessments to be adopted by organizations to balance the risks and benefits, right? Because there are a lot of benefits which a lot of organizations are trying to drive, but then you also need to look at the value quotient vis-a-vis that. Recently I was reading a Gartner report, and it stipulated that by 2025, privacy lawsuits and claims related to biometric information processing and cyber physical systems will have resulted in over 8 billion in fines and settlements. With that in the backdrop, Rajesh, could you please tell us what are the vulnerabilities vis-a-vis, data handling, data processing, and do you think the laws are abreast with the technological development? While we heard Justice Sri Krishna that in India there's a lot of conversation, we are shaping up data privacy legislation, but just a global view would really help.
Thanks, Sonal. First, thanks for the Institute of Directors for giving this opportunity, and thanks for being part of this panel. I've been had a worked with each one of you. I mean, one way or the other. I mean, Chandan or Mayuran, and I've connected with Sona. So it's been a great to be here. So coming back to the question on most of the from a cross-border data transfer or from a data sharing and disclosing perspective. So literally, when we see from what you qualify as a cross-border, I mean, there are many challenges in terms of whether a disclosure is valid. Is it something that falls within the ambit of a legal requirement? And if it has to fall within the ambit of the legal requirement, is that in compliance with the regulations is something which is very clear and it is restricted to the respective local law of the country. So what happens here is, this is, even though we are in a globalized period, even though GDPR has its own harmonization to make sure that the laws that are there is something that all the European countries have it in common, but there are ambit of differences in which where the risk and vulnerabilities gets exposed as part of these data sharing and data disclosures. So in short, what we have seen in the European is basically only to think of adequacy as one of the mechanism. You have a mechanism called the binding corporate rule, which is a cumbersome process, which takes long time and depends on the organization, their presence in multiple locations, and their authorities coming with a view. So, that's one. But the most best comfortable mechanism that used to exist was executing a standard contracting process. Now, the risk was now the GDPR and with the SCRIMS 2 guidelines that came into picture last year. The SEC got updated, but it brought along with the recommendations that SCRIM 2 guideline. It's a much awaited. It was supposed to be passed before the SCRIMS judgment, but I think the EDBP had to wait for the DPC, the Ireland, the Data Protection Commissioner's case that was pending against the SCRIMS. Facebook in front of the CJU, and finally when that came, this got delayed totally, and finally the SEC came in. SEC is a standalone document with a lot of challenges that when somebody has to agree to it and sign it, because there is nothing that you can change to that. Now the vulnerabilities, coming to the vulnerabilities that you asked, see, what is the vulnerability primarily is, according to me, I would see kind of three major vulnerabilities that really exposes the risk when it comes to cross-border data privacy. Number one is culture. Now, when we talk about culture, there is two parameters to it. One is, it is awareness from the stakeholders' perspective in terms of due to the societal values, due to the in terms of how people handle their own data. So according to them, their awareness what privacy is very different from the other country, how they treat privacy. Because privacy is very unique in nature, because for me, my date of birth may not be sensitive, so I may disclose it on Facebook, but for you, it may not be the case, because it is unique to you. For you, you feel it is something which is more important to be protected. There is the other aspect of culture is about the organization. I mean, organization's culture, the way how they have been existing. Consider the fact that it is an entity which is established in Philippines, the primary parent entity, but it has its entities and branches located in multiple locations such as Dubai, South Africa, Dubai. The culture is very different, because when the entity in Philippines is actually having its business strategy and vision, their culture is more focus on the outsourcing industry to see how they could get more data to be made sure that it can be localized coming into the Philippine market in order to provide services. And the challenges here is there are restrictions in moving the data in a more identifiable format because it is infringing to some of the regulatory requirements. Now, even though Europe started this, now we are seeing different other mechanisms also. If you look at the Turkey law, which was passed in 2016, or the POPIA, which is in South Africa, it was passed in 2013 and it came into existence last year. You can't move a sensitive data irrespective of any adequacy mechanism unless or until you as an entity have to approach the authority for prior consultation and take an approval. So I think the stringent mechanism of cross-border data transfers are moving because there are a lot of loopholes around the way the business is getting transacted between the organizations. So that is the first vulnerability I could really bring it onto the market that really puts a question on these measures that cover or revolve around the topic called as cross-border data transfers. The second one is the extended enterprise. You look at an organization in the past, I mean, you look at even an SME or an MSME, I mean, there is no distinctions to it. You look at an organization, it is not an independent player in the market. There are organizations which have close to around 10,000 plus extended enterprises, or the vendors, alliance partners, subcontractors who are part of the major organization, and bringing their culture ambit and bringing their practices and making sure the client's practices are followed. It is one of the biggest under the GDPR. Cross-border, specifically from a supplier or from an extended enterprises, have been one of the key issues and one of the most important reasons why GDPR came into existence, repealing speakers in the past from a cybersecurity perspective actually covered it. The last and most important thing is, as an organization, the way the business is carried out, with Chandan bringing it and Mayuran bringing it, the way the data is getting collated, the way the data is planned and intended to be used, the way they wanted to deploy, technologies. Now we don't have anything, if you look at an organization today, we are living in a world where people are more not being able to control that, to collaborate, to come out with innovation of opportunities. And you won't believe it. And when they try to come out with creating a Power BI application, they would create a process which would involve handling and processing of internal employee data, which is beyond organizational scope. And the risk goes so high that there is no way you can control it, the accessibility of the data. And many organizations which have its presence where the data is located out there. I'm not looking only from a controller processor standpoint. We need to look at, we as India, we have organizations which has, being MNCs, present branches and other entities which are present outside as well. I mean, think of the fact that you are handling COVID vaccination data in a particular database, and that database is accessible to everyone within the organization, which really violates the cross-border obligation that is you agree as part of the SEC or within your own policy. So that's a really fearsome. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that I could potentially see, from a in terms of how this gets into the case of how this has been increasing, and this challenge is more and more evolving with more space as we move into cloud. We have seen every authority is coming up with new directions in terms of guidelines. What should be followed if we are going to adhere to certain cloud usage guidelines? I think last week, Denmark also came out with some stringent guidelines in order to make sure, because I think we need to accept the fact that data privacy is not going to be a blockade, but it is also going to be a huge challenge of compliance cost for organizations to meet it, especially when we are doing in a business in a globalized scenario. And last but not the least, I just wanted to clarify, there's something called cross-border data transfer, and there is something called as data localizations. And these are two different ambit, but they do overlap at some point of time. Data localization is strictly, it is an internal organizations specifically to data that they have to, and that is existing ever. In India, we have telecom already had it. You can't move a telecom billing user data based from the Indian Telegraph Act, which existing for more than 100 down years. You can't move that data because there's a localization, very clear requirement. We had an encryption policy which came in very clearly saying 40 bits to be used as encryption, which is way far below the NIST standards. So that is, but it's getting overlapped. Why? It is because of the law enforcement, the reliability of keeping storage on cloud and storage available on locations where you need to exercise legal and administrative responsibilities, and that time taking, which is not meeting with the standards. So I think that's where it is getting overlapped. But from a perspective of overall, these are some of the vulnerabilities and risks that I potentially see when it comes from a cross-border data transfer perspective.
Thank you, Rajesh. that is so important, right? The data is not only flowing across the borders, but even within your own country, if you're sharing data, as a controller with the processor, or as a processor with a sub-processor, you need to ensure that you have good governance, contractual and otherwise, within the supply chain as well. So thanks for that perspective. So I'm going to request Mayuran to give his perspective on what needs to be done for effective data governance for cross-border data flows across supply chain, because we know Rajesh has given a good view in terms of how vulnerable we are. So what could be done from a risk mitigation standpoint? And I would also request Chandan to give his views.
Sure. So, Sonal, in fact, I think Rajesh has covered it end to end, but let me try to add. I don't know what to add, but let me try to add on top of it. Okay. So, I think the biggest game changer in this is the Schrems 2, right? I think that verdict actually kind of, I mean, not only for the transatlantic data transfer, it is also kind of impacting the data transfer from EU to rest of the world as well, right? So, I mean, while I mean, Rajesh covered about the SECs, which has been suggested by European Data Protection Board, and definitely there are a lot of steps have been suggested to say that, okay, what are the things an organization need to do while they're going to transfer data? But if you apply a very simple lens, right? I mean, if you look at the entire ecosystem of supply chain, where we have the biggest challenge or the weakest link is the third parties in many ways, right? I mean, while many organizations have been kind of embarked into the journey of being compliant to privacy regulations and doing better data governance, the area which they kind of left unattended was the third party, but they have realized it, they're working on it now. And many organizations are still kind of grappling with this issue. I mean, they're kind of in the very initial stages. So, I mean, just to simplify the entire thing, one of the biggest problem we have is that knowing what is the data going on, right? Or what is the data we want to share, right? That is where, depending on the type of the data, as Rajesh mentioned, the data localization may be relevant. Things around your data minimization as a concept, right? How do we bring in those things? I mean, that's what every regulation is talking about, right? And every best practice around privacy is talking about data minimization. So once you know the data going out, right, next step would be to understand the risk involved, right? I mean, the risk involved can be addressed in many ways. I mean, if it is an adequate country, obviously there's a better reliance on that. If an organization who is demonstrating better control around privacy or security, they may have a slightly different perspective on that. But many times we miss out understanding the risk involved, right? So unless we understand the risk, I mean, there is no way you can really kind of mitigate or put in a control. Otherwise, what will happen is that if you try to apply a kind of a blanket control mechanism on any such data transfer, it will have a negative impact on the data processing as well as the entire business ecosystem, right? So, and what is now picking up is something called the data transfer impact assessment, right? TIA, as call it. I mean, this is whenever there's a third parties involved in the process, and if the data transfer is happening outside the jurisdiction, there is also a lens applied from the transfer impact assessment point of view to understand what sort of impact the transfer is creating, right? So I believe this is a key area for many organizations now, and it's not a simple task because depending on the size of the organization, I mean, you may have thousands or hundreds of third parties, and you can't apply a same lens of risk across all of them also, right? Then it's going to be an overkill. So how do you really balance out where you want to put in the money and effort, right? And where you can say that, okay, I'm okay to live with the risk, right? So that's an act which is going to take longer, but I think that's extremely critical for somebody like a CRO or somebody who's focusing on risk point of view to take a call at the earliest and kind of streamline things, right? So probably that's my answer to your question, Sonal. And I'd like to touch upon one point on which Chandan mentioned earlier, right? In terms of how the cyber crime has evolved. I mean, I was in another panel 2 days back. So one of the panelists highlighted this point. I found it very interesting. I mean, if the cyber crime is considered to be a country, right, and that will have the highest GDP, because that's the level of money involved in this. And I'm sure that of late we are reading a lot of things around how the cyber criminals are organized, right? I mean, they are running like professional organizations. They do kind of appraisals, right, for how their people are performing, so on and so forth. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start getting listed also eventually on a lighter side, right? So that's the direction we are evolving, and I can understand when Chandan says that it's giving sleepless nights. I mean, this is the reason.
That's I know there's a lot happening across the board, and I don't think the perpetrators are sparing even the governmental organizations. But thanks for that. Chandan, Mayuran did explain the fact that we can't stop doing business, and we need to support the business interests, and it's also important to understand and assess the risks. So how could we focus on risk mitigation? Because at the end of it, we would need to focus on risk mitigation. So what are your views in terms of what risk mitigation strategies could be implemented so that we continue supporting the business and we continue doing the business?
So, Suman, first and foremost, there is no silver bullet. There is no set standard called this is the way we need to go, right? It all depends what is the exposure, what kind of data that particular organization is dealing with, what is the business that they are doing, right? Based on that, some amount of governance on the data, structured approach, managed approach to have the data governance in place, to set the right governance in place. That is the first requirement, right? Who actually owns the data? So the largest problem that I see in any organization today is there's no set owner of any data. So today, is it owned by business, delivery, HR, IT, security, legal, finance? Nobody knows who actually owns the data. Somebody has to own the data first, right? Whether it is the business function who is actually owning the data or the HR function, somebody has to own the data. Now, once that part is set, then we need to also understand IT and technology. They are only the enablers. They are not the accountable or responsible person, right? A lot of organizations, there is a misconception that IT needs to manage everything, right? We need to get away from that, right? They are only technology enablers, right? Based on the risk assessment, based on the risk, right? They need to enable right set of control. Somebody has to assess that and tell them what needs to be done. But if both the accountability and implementation goes to them, then that is definitely a recipe for disaster, right? So that is something we need to fix. Second thing, the risk management has to happen with a balanced approach. See, India is the largest data processor today, right? We process whatever I mentioned earlier, probably 90% of the data by Indian players. So that means there is a lot of data which is flowing back to India or probably we are accessing elsewhere. Now, with that insight, it is very difficult for us to figure out what amount of data we have exposure, what are the different requirements that we have, where are these data, right? There are the set of activities that we need to do, right? From your discovery, classification, protection, labeling, your data leakage prevention, right? Record management, your disposals, all that we need to do. But first and foremost, have a owner, then have a governance process in place, ensure that right accountability is there, and then follow the BAUs, what probably I think Myron also mentioned, Rajesh also mentioned some of them, but some of these issues needs to be fixed right from the beginning. That's my take.
Thank you, Chandan, for that. I think the most important lesson is to ensure that we have a data lifecycle management is well established, and of course a data privacy framework, and also the process is established. I know we are running against time, so I'm going to ask Rajesh to give a view on penalties, because I like the fact that IT is only the enabler who is responsible to establish the set of controls, but how do we make the other stakeholders aware of what those penalties are and how stringent those are, so that at least we kind of create that level of awareness on accountability aspect. So Rajesh, if you could share your thoughts on that, please.
Sure. So it's an interesting question, and that's definitely, I'm sure Myron will totally agree to it. That's the trump card in the board that you can make the board to shiver in terms of the penalties. And penalties, when you call it as something like 4% or the annual turnover of the company, or if you're going to call in Singapore case 10% of the annual turnover, and I'm definitely sure that irrespective, even if there's an operational failure, they consider it to be taking the same care and attention as if it is a regulatory failure. So I think penalties have been one of the requirements which I think GDPR has actually enforced on. And I think it has caught up with many other countries as well, and they are all on the same plane. Irrespective, it's like a cakewalk basically for a lot of authorities to use this as one kind of a mechanism to pull in the budgets and resources for making their enforcement actions much more stringent. If you have to take authorities like Italy or Spain, you go and look at, there are close to around 700 enforcements till date after GDPR come into picture. And out of this 700, you will see Spain and Italy covering more than 50% of the enforcement actions that has been taken against some of the most of the controllers and processors as well. So penalties 4%, it's a very huge sum. You go for even BCR, this becomes one of the biggest bottleneck in terms of identifying the entity which is going to give you that kind of unlimited liability cover. We are also seeing penalties in the way where clients are enforcing and transferring that risk to service providers, and as a case of a lot of unlimited liability clauses. And I'm sure for legal fraternities who are involved in contract negotiations, this is one of the top list of items to see if we can reduce it. It's an attempt which is there on the board, but never able to, I'm sure you will never be able to come to a conclusion of where the client says, okay, we don't worry, we understand the risk is mutual. I don't think that's going to be the objective with which any client is going to agree to. And we have the other side of risk where when you engage with vendor, you are not able to enforce the same kind of liability cover on your vendors, because the vendor is not either capitalistic, they are not as big as big vendors that are there in the market. There are big vendors who don't want it to agree to an unlimited cap because they hold a monopoly in the market. So it's almost a huge challenge. But at the end of the day, when you look at legislations like GDPR, or you look at the Brazilian legislation, LGPD, it has been quite clear that they are not bothered about either entity A or B or the controller or the processor. It's more towards data subjects. And I think penalties have become one of the important. And as we speak right now, there's a public consultation going on, even in countries like Philippines, where they wanted to administer how the penalty will have to be levied against organization. So this is going to be the deterrent measures that I'm sure authorities are going to enforce. And they are publishing a lot of 3-year action plans in terms of how they are going to target organizations in terms of enforcements and levying penalty. They're not using the operations, the methodology that is deployed by US, where you collaborate, try to settle. No, that's not going to work in countries like Europe. It's going to be different. It's going to be hardline penalty that organizations are about to face from a GDPR or any kind of data privacy violations.
Thank you, Rajesh. So I think the message is very clear. I don't think any of us should wait to be reactive, because there are no insurance products as well in the market except for one country in the globe, which would cover the fines and penalties, right? So it's better to focus on risk mitigation as opposed to trying to understand how to go about it at a later stage. We just have 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask my last question to Mayuran, because Mayuran, you work with clients across different industries. So how do you see the role of board? And of course, we do have a lot of accountability being transferred to the management and the board, independent board members under the upcoming law. But why do you think the board oversight is important, and how could it be enhanced?
Sure. So Sonal, I mean, if I just go 5-6 years back, I think cyber was not a conversation in the board at all, right? I mean, leave aside privacy. I think it took some time, right? People started realizing the importance of being cyber prepared. And as we had more incidents coming in, I think it kind of pushed people to start talking about it. So, I mean, there's a huge difference I see between Indian organizations within certain sectors and some of the global organizations. I'll tell you why the difference is, right? So some of the industries which are regulated already, right? I mean, this is an agenda, a standard agenda in most of the board discussions, saying that what are the cyber preparedness and where we are investing, right? How well are we protected, so on and so forth. But there are sectors which still have to catch up on that. If I compare organizations which are outside India, wherever there's a regulation, for example, we used to do a lot of work with countries like Malaysia and Singapore. So they have a solid focus on data privacy, right? And data protection in terms of what is that organization doing beyond the cyber preparedness, so on and so forth. I think the key difference is the regulation. I think this is what Justice also mentioned some time back. I think the moment the regulation comes into, becomes a kind of, or enacted, I believe that there'll be a lot of focus. And my recommendation would be to kind of, as all of us have been telling, I don't think we have to kind of panic and change the world completely. That's not the expectation, right? And the way the regulation is also evolving, we really don't know how the shape and form is going to be, right? But there are certain fundamental steps which we can do, right? Including understanding the data, right? Doing an assessment of risk in terms of what is happening around, right? And in case of third parties involved, how the contracting can be strengthened, right? So one of the key points is that, which probably relates to the previous question you had asked. Many times we have controls around the security in the contracts, right? It doesn't talk really about what is the obligation from privacy point of view, or it is generally vague, right? You'll say, okay, you need to comply to GDPR, right? It's very, very high level, right? How do we really kind of bring that clarity? So on and so forth is extremely critical. But in a short way, I would say that, our boards are changing. They're talking about it. They're getting insights from experts, so on and so forth. But it will take some time. And I'm sure that there'll be drastic change the moment we have the regulation in place. But time to start thinking about the preparation.
Thank you for that. And I don't know, Pras, if we have 2 more minutes, but I would just want to nudge Chandan to share some best practices as a CISO, if he could quickly in 1 minute do that, please.
Chandan, you're on mute.
Chandan, you're on mute.
Sorry. So when you say best practices, again, no Dolo 650 for this, what we have. Now, probably a couple of things that we can do. One, bring in privacy and data security more closer, right? Today, these are 2 parallel lines, so we have to bring them a little more closer. Increase efficiency of your both privacy and security closer to the data, right? Then use privacy and security again by design, not as an afterthought, right? And operationalize controls right at the beginning, the entire ecosystem of data, right from the generation till disposal. Ensure that right set of controls with design is there. And probably the last one, there's something called zero trust in the market, right? There are different variations, different ways of looking at zero trust, but I would say zero trust is one area that we should consider when sensitive data comes into picture. So that would be my few takeaways from this session.
Thank you so much. And Rajesh, I'm just going to summarize on your behalf as well, both of us being lawyers, that I think it's extremely important for organizations to practice principles of accountability, responsibility, and transparency, because I think that's going to help governance, of course. And having a robust data privacy framework and developing a cybersecurity program will definitely help the organizations mitigate risk. And last but not the least, focus on the value quotient. If you look at the pyramid, of course, you have compliance at the base, and of course, you assess the risks and focus on risk mitigation. But if the culture of the organization is to focus on privacy and drive privacy conversations, I think then, security aspect would also go hand in hand. And that would also help the organizations mitigate a lot of risk. So that's about it. I would like to thank each of the panel members. I know I didn't give you enough time to share your views adequately, but whatever time you got, you've given very good insights, and I would like to thank each of you for that. Over to you, Prasanna.
So you are mute, sir.
Mr. Prasanna, over to you.
JS, is there any question on your thing, or are we ready to wrap up?
Only one question I had, because all of them were speaking on who owns the data. Chandan, I think at least I am very clear the company owns the data. So, and where would it go wrong? I think, it's the board who is going to be held responsible for anything that's going to go wrong. And of course, Rajesh put it so nicely. Only thing is, India, there's no penalty as of date, if I'm right. But I think it's just waiting out there. That's the only law which does not have a penalty. Unfortunately.
It is there under 43A, but it is not. Our enforcement is very low. Just to answer who owns the data, I think as long as every organization starts understanding one thing, that it is not the company which owns the data is actually owned by the data subject. That means you're handling somebody belongs to others, then everything will fall in place. If that falls in flight pace, then I think everything should take care.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's my...
Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much, Sonal, Chandan, Rajesh, and Mayuran. Thank you for taking time out. And it is late, and it's. I wish you all a very pleasant evening and a good celebration of the Holi. You made this panel discussion colorful, but you are entitled to play with some colors now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And if you can just stay on for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, we are just wrapping up. I would like Mr. Rajan to propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah. Good evening. We had an excellent discussion on various aspects of data governance over the last 2.5 hours. Justice Sri Krishna gave a very enlightening keynote address. And he said that the main principle of data protection is that nobody can take my data without my consent. So this is a very important point, consent to be taken. And he also mentioned that a regulator is very important for taking care of the data aspects, protection aspects. And in future, there could be issues regarding trade with other countries, which should be properly addressed in the new act which is coming up. As regards Professor Raghunath from Institute of IIM Bangalore, he said that the companies need to build trust with the consumers so that consumers will part data easily to the companies. And a set of controls need to be put around security, data privacy while deploying new technology. And ethical use of data is very important. Mr. Anand also said that the companies should have the stewardship of data collection and protection. And companies should invest in data governance. For directors, compliance, ethics, and corporate strategy are the key issues in data governance. Coming to the panel discussion, which was ably chaired by Ms. Sonal Basu, General Counsel of Mindtree, and the panelist, Mr. Chandan Pani, Chief Information and Security Officer of Mindtree, Mr. Rajesh Kumar, Senior Group Manager, Data Protection Office of Infosys, and Mr. Mayuran, the partner cybersecurity at KPMG. So they had a very interesting discussion. And as Mr. Pras said, a very colorful discussion as well. And in fact, I was very, the one point which Mr. Chandan made, that every minute we are generating 80 zettabytes of data daily, and every day, sorry. And the Google transactions are around 5.7 million searches per minute, and 6 million people doing transaction online. So imagine the amount of data being generated on a minute-by-minute basis. Naturally, it calls for protection and proper utilization. So definitely, the panel discussion was very useful. And one more point, Rajesh mentioned that the cultural values are very important in data privacy, protection and privacy, because what you think is private may not be thought of private by others. So it's a very important point he made of the cultural issues in data privacy. And I also want to thank Mr. Prasanna and Mr. Balakrishnan for the opening remarks, and from Sundareshan for asking very good questions. Of course, our partner Mindtree has been very generous in the support to the IOD Bangalore office, and we thank Mindtree, Larsen and Toubro group company, for being the presenting partner for this very important webinar on data governance. I also thank the other IOD staff who have helped us in having this webinar in a very nice manner. And I also thank all the participants who came for this webinar and asked some very good questions and searching questions. And definitely we'll make a compilation of this today's 2.5 hour deliberation, and we'll publish it in the directors today, and we'll send a copy of this report to all the panelists and to all the speakers, as well as a copy of this will also apply. It will also come in our directors today of next issue. Thank you very much, and have a safe and happy Holi.
May I request Brigadier Kapoor to make announcement of the future event?
Yeah, very good evening to you, all of you. So the calendar of events for the next financial year is under preparation, but we are going to be having approximately 4 to 6 events planned, which we have at the regional level, also around about 10 events at the national / 3 events, as well as for the 3 to 5 events for international level. The next event which we are planning is in the month of May, that is May 13th, which is in collaboration with the MSME Development Institute, Ministry of MSME. And we definitely look forward for your support and shall be sharing the entire content with all of you well in advance. Thank you very much, everyone, for great participation, and looking forward to seeing you soon, and happy Holi to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for being with us all through. Thank you very much. It means a lot to us.
Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed the interaction.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in person in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.